Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Alistair arrived home late in the evening after a long business trip, exhausted but relieved to be back. His wife Becca, whom he'd started calling Becca ever since their college days, greeted him with a soft smile. She looked a bit different to him tonight, more vibrant, more eager, and somehow a little more something else. He brushed it off, chalking it up to his tired eyes playing tricks after too many hours in airport terminals. Alistair, honey, I have some news, Becca said, her smile almost shy, her eyes sparkling in a way that felt a little out of place. Alistair noticed it, but pushed the feeling aside. I'm pregnant, she whispered. Alistair froze for a moment, the words hanging in the air longer than they should have, like an echo. He wasn't quite ready for this, but he quickly pulled himself together, offering her a reassuring nod and a warm hug. He told himself to act happy, even though the news settled heavily on his chest. That's wonderful, Becca, he murmured softly. Becca held his hand a little tighter, her excitement bubbling over. We're going to have twins, Alistair, she added, her eyes wide with joy. The word twins landed on Alistair's heart like a stone, making everything feel heavier than it already was. He forced a smile, nodding along as Becca excitedly talked about doctor visits, due dates, and everything that felt so distant to him. He was supposed to feel joy, but all he could manage was a hollow acceptance and a weak attempt to mirror her enthusiasm. Before long, she was onto something else. Oh, and we'll need to have one of those big gender reveal parties, with fun contests and games. Doesn't that sound fun? She bounced with excitement, her eyes sparkling even brighter. Alistair, still trying to mask his weariness, offered a tired but dutiful reply. Sure, whatever you want, Becca. Just then, their young son Billy, who had been quietly listening, perked up at the mention of a party. A party? He asked, his face lighting up at the thought of games and fun. Alistair smiled at Billy, ruffling his hair, but the nagging feeling that had been bothering him lingered. He watched his son, seeing him through a different lens now. Alistair spent some time with Billy, listening to the boy excitedly chat about the party ideas Becca had mentioned. Yet, even as he tried to engage, his mind was elsewhere, tangled in a web of suspicion and dread that he couldn't shake off. Becca's news had only confirmed something Alistair had feared for months. He knew too much already. For months, he'd been uncovering Becca's secrets that had slowly begun to unravel the foundation of their family. Now, with the news of twins hanging in the air, Alistair realized he could no longer ignore the truth. Their family was at a crossroads, and it felt like he was standing alone, watching the road split before him. A few days later, Alistair found himself heading back to the airport, preparing for another business trip. The rhythm of his life had long been defined by work trips, long flights, hotel rooms with stale air, and the sight of unfamiliar cities under hazy morning skies. For years, he hadn't worried about what was happening back home. He had trusted Becca completely, believing their marriage was built on love and honesty. But as he settled into his seat on the plane, an unfamiliar weight pressed down on his chest. It was a feeling that had slowly crept in over the past few months, a quiet, bitter unease. Alistair had never been the type to question Becca's loyalty. He loved her, after all, and she was the mother of his son. But now, little details that he had brushed off before kept returning, pulling at him with an insistent, nagging persistence. He opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keys before reluctantly clicking on a folder. It wasn't his usual collection of work files or spreadsheets. No, this folder contained something he had kept hidden, even from himself, like a bad dream he wasn't ready to confront. Alistair began scrolling, his eyes scanning the familiar screen, taking in the images that played out silently before him. But instead of the satisfaction he had hoped for, a hollow, sickening sadness washed over him as he continued. The videos only intensified his unease, stirring up a strange, unexpected anger that he had long kept buried, trying to pretend it wasn't there. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning back in his seat, trying to shake the sense of betrayal that seemed to be seeping deeper into his bones with each passing second. His mind wandered, and suddenly, an image of Timothy, his neighbor, popped into his thoughts. Timothy, with his easygoing smile, and the way he'd come over to help Alistair clear the yard last summer without a second thought. Timothy, who was always quick with a joke, a pat on the back, and a warm, friendly laugh. Could someone really be that good, that warm, that open, without hiding something beneath the surface? The thought left a bitter taste in Alistair's mouth, and he couldn't shake it. People can be chameleons, he reminded himself. People can put on masks, especially those you trust the most. That uncertainty was what unsettled him, the possibility that he'd been deceived. Everything kept circling back to one thing, one unavoidable truth that haunted him. Even as the plane cut through the clouds, high above a world he suddenly felt disconnected from, Alistair knew what was coming next. He had to be ready for the party Becca had planned, the grand gender reveal event she was so excited about. She told him it would be an unforgettable celebration, one their friends and family would remember for years. But as Alistair gazed out at the gray sky beyond his window, he knew that for him, this party wouldn't be about balloons or colored confetti. No, he'd be preparing for something else entirely. He wanted to end it all, to tear down the fragile facade he and Becca had been living behind, to finally face the truth that had been gnawing at him. He felt trapped, caged in by the lies, but he couldn't act on it just yet. He needed time to get his affairs in order. There was too much at stake, and if Alistair acted now, he'd risk losing more than just his peace of mind. For the first time, he found himself questioning the things he had once taken for granted about his family, even his little boy, Billy. At only 6 years old, Billy's heart and eyes were pure, and the last thing Alistair wanted was for him to be caught in the middle of a storm he never asked for. So Alistair would bide his time, hold on to his suspicions, and quietly build a path toward freedom, a way to walk away from the life he had once loved, with his head held high and his assets intact. The weeks dragged on, each one feeling like a strange mix of resentment, patience, and small preparations. Becca was completely absorbed in the pregnancy, planning every detail of the twins' arrival with a level of excitement that, in a different world, would have been contagious. She chattered endlessly about cribs and baby clothes, about how much fun the gender reveal party would be, never noticing the change in Alistair. She didn't see how his once open gaze had turned calculating, how he had begun staying up late at night, not for work, but to gather everything he would need for the life he was planning to build on his own terms. Alistair played the role of the devoted husband, keeping up appearances while meticulously preparing for the life he was about to live alone. He met with his lawyer in secret, made careful adjustments to his finances, and arranged a modest, quiet living situation away from all the pretense. He even found time to investigate matters concerning Billy, a process that kept him awake with worry. As the months slipped by, Alistair became a master of patience. He'd smile on cue, laugh at the right times, but beneath it all, a growing resolve took root. Finally, the day arrived, the day of the grand gender reveal. Their backyard was transformed, with colorful tables, flower arrangements, and banners welcoming guests that surrounded the lawn. Friends and family mingled, and Becca, glowing with joy, wore a radiant smile. The guests lined up for food, exchanging predictions about whether the babies would be boys or girls. Alistair moved through the crowd quietly, his face serious, his thoughts miles away from the idle chatter around him. He wore his best suit, a sharp one he hadn't worn in years, and it fit him with the same precision that matched the look in his eyes. His gaze landed on Timothy, who was laughing with another neighbor near the refreshments, and Alistair's mind went cold. Alistair's gaze lingered a moment longer on Timothy, who caught his eye and flashed a friendly smile. Alistair chose not to return the gesture today. He didn't need to pretend anymore. Standing tall, Alistair scanned the scene before him like a hawk, feeling the weight of months filled with secrets and quiet resolve. The moment he had been preparing for had arrived, the moment that would free him from the tangled mess his life had become. As Becca, practically glowing, stepped up to the small platform they'd set up in the backyard, she called for everyone's attention, her smile wide and bright. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this special day with us," she began, scanning the crowd of friends, family, and neighbors. "Family means everything to us, and with our 2 little ones on the way, we're so excited to start this new chapter together. So, we thought a fun contest would make today even more special." The crowd clapped eagerly, anticipating the grand reveal. In the center of the platform, a large balloon hovered, filled with either pink or blue confetti. Becca turned to Alistair, her eyes filled with expectation. He took a deep breath, the weight of the past few months pressing down on him, but he managed to maintain his composure. "Before we get to the big moment," Alistair said, raising a hand to quiet the crowd, "I'd like to give my wife a small gift." Becca looked surprised, caught off guard, but smiled, likely thinking it was just another sweet gesture to add to the day's excitement. Alistair handed her a beautifully wrapped box, the ribbon tied neatly, the paper bright and colorful, almost cheerful, in contrast to the heavy, stony look in his eyes. The crowd fell silent, curious to see what this gift was all about. Becca opened the box slowly, her smile faltering as she peeled back the paper and lifted the lid. Inside, there were 2 stacks of papers. The first was thick, stamped with the unmistakable words, "divorce papers" at the top. The second was thinner but no less devastating, bearing the title, "DNA test results," with Alistair and Billy's names printed in bold. The color drained from Becca's face as she pulled the papers from the box, struggling to understand what she was holding. The guests around them began murmuring, confusion spreading like wildfire. The atmosphere froze, everyone waiting for an explanation that hung in the air, unspoken. Alistair turned to face the crowd, his voice cutting through the silence, firm and unwavering. "I shouldn't be the one standing here," he said, his tone hard. "These future twins, this big reveal, it's not for me. It's for Timothy." He pointed to the neighbors standing awkwardly near the back, drink still in hand. "Timothy should be up here. He should be the one popping this balloon." The crowd gasped. Heads turned to Timothy, who looked as though he'd just been struck by lightning. His face went pale, and his eyes widened in disbelief. His wife, standing beside him, went rigid, her hand gripping her glass so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Becca, still reeling, stared at Alistair, tears welling up in her eyes. Her voice trembled as she barely whispered, "Alistair, these are divorce papers and a DNA test. What's going on? Why are you doing this?" Alistair met her gaze, his eyes filled with cold determination that had been building for months. "Becca," he replied, his voice low but clear, "I know more than you think. I know about the secret life you've been leading, the lies you've been feeding me all while I was working hard for our family. And as for how I found out, well, it's all right there, in black and white. I did what I had to do. Billy and I deserve the truth." The guests exchanged stunned glances, their whispers growing louder as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The weight of the betrayal hung over the crowd like a dark cloud, and an almost surreal silence fell over the yard as everyone processed what had just happened. Becca, still clutching the divorce papers and DNA results, looked as if her entire world had shattered in her hands. She blinked, her lips parted, too stunned to speak as Alistair stood tall, unsmiling, waiting for the silence to become almost unbearable. With a deep, calm breath, Alistair spoke again, his voice steady. "Well, Becca, why don't we get back to what you planned?" He nodded toward the black balloon hovering above them. "Everyone's waiting for the big reveal. After all." Becca, wide-eyed and trembling, just stared, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Alistair stepped forward, addressing the crowd with a weary authority. "You know, it's funny how life works. While I was busy working hard, planning for a future with my wife and son, my loyal wife was out there, let's say, having some adventures in the arms of another man." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the shocked crowd. "I could show you all the footage from the cameras I installed at home," he continued, his tone unwavering, "but dear guests, I'd rather spare you from those, let's just say, less than clean videos. You don't need to see the details to understand what's been going on." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, some muttering in disbelief, while others stood frozen in stunned silence. Becca's friends covered their mouths, their expressions a mix of shock and confusion. Becca herself was breathing heavily, her face a twisted mix of horror and humiliation. "But that's not even the worst part," Alistair said, his voice growing colder. He looked directly at Becca, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "The worst part is that all of this led me to question things I never wanted to question. I did a DNA test with my son, Billy," Alistair said, pausing as the weight of his words sank into the crowd. "It turns out, Billy isn't my child." Becca shook her head frantically, her face turning bright red with a mix of anger and disbelief. "No, Alistair, no. This is insane," she sputtered, her voice rising to a near scream. "What kind of sick joke is this? Billy is your son, and these babies, they're yours too." But her words faltered, the conviction quickly dissolving into guilt and pain that was written all over her face. Alistair shook his head, unmoved. "I don't know who Billy's father is, Becca. Maybe it's Timothy. But what I do know for certain is that Timothy is the father of these twins." The crowd went silent. The shock of Alistair's revelation hung heavily in the air. All eyes turned to Timothy, who stood pale and stiff, his mouth agape in disbelief. His wife, standing beside him, looked at him with a mix of shock, hurt, and raw fury. Alistair waved to the crowd casually, as if this were just another farewell. For those of you who want more details, you're welcome to join me at divorce court, he said, his voice steady and resolute. But for me, it's time to move on. Time for a new life, one without the lies and betrayal. Whispers erupted among the guests as Alistair took one last look around the yard. Becca, unable to hold back any longer, burst into tears, her voice rising into frantic, panicked shouts. No, this is all a lie, Alistair. You can't believe this. I am your wife. I've been faithful. This is just a sick misunderstanding. She stumbled toward him, clutching the papers in her hands, pleading. Alistair, Becca shouted, but he didn't turn around. He simply moved toward the gate, determined and resolute. Timothy, fuming with anger, stepped forward to intercept him. Alistair, come on. We need to talk. You can't just walk away, he hissed, reaching out to stop him. Alistair didn't break his pace. With a simple sidestep, he tripped Timothy, sending him sprawling to the ground. Looking down at him, Alistair's voice was low but unwavering. You're not my neighbor, Timothy. You're not my friend. You're just another traitor, like Becca. I have nothing more to say to you. Without a second glance, Alistair stepped over Timothy and made his way to his car. The crowd parted as he walked through them. Once inside, he took one final look at the stunned faces around him, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the gasps, whispers, and the shattered pieces of his past. No one knew where he was going. Only Alistair knew that he was driving toward a future that would finally be his. In the months leading up to the divorce, Alistair carefully planned to protect his money and assets. He worked with financial experts and lawyers who helped him set up strategies to keep everything safe from Becca. Alistair knew she would try to claim as much as she could, so he made sure there would be nothing left for her to take. First, Alistair transferred ownership of his home into a family trust. This made it legally difficult for Becca to claim it. He also moved all his bank accounts, investments, and retirement funds into accounts under the trust's name, so they were off-limits to her. He then took steps to protect other valuable items. He sold these assets and moved the money into an offshore account in a country with strict privacy laws, making it nearly impossible for anyone to find or access. To make things even more complicated for Becca, Alistair set up multiple companies under different names and moved some of his money into these businesses. This made it harder for anyone to link the businesses to him personally. Alistair also transferred his stocks and shares into companies that were separate from his name. This way, Becca couldn't directly trace them back to him. He even moved some of his money into cryptocurrency, which is much harder to track or steal. Alistair's lawyer helped him set up everything in a way that would be very difficult for Becca to uncover. When the divorce began, Alistair knew that Becca wouldn't be able to touch any of his assets. His money was safe, and he had done everything he could to make sure she couldn't get her hands on it. The steps he took were his way of protecting himself and ensuring that his hard work wasn't wasted. Alistair entered the courthouse with a quiet confidence, knowing he was well prepared and several steps ahead of his soon-to-be ex-wife. He had taken every precaution to protect what was rightfully his, and no matter what Becca or her lawyer tried, they wouldn't be able to touch his hard-earned assets. As the proceedings began, Alistair presented his evidence, and the courtroom fell silent. Along with the divorce papers, he submitted hours of video footage captured by hidden cameras he'd installed throughout their home. The footage clearly showed Becca and Timothy, laughing, whispering, and embracing each other in intimate spaces that should have been sacred to him. One clip caught Becca softly giggling as she leaned into Timothy, her hands on his chest. "I can't believe we're finally free to do this," Becca whispered, her voice low but unmistakable. Timothy, smiling, replied, "I know, Becca. It's been worth the wait." The camera captured them sneaking into a bedroom, oblivious to the fact that Alistair had been at work, sacrificing time with his family to provide for them. Alistair's voice was steady as he recounted his years of hard work, his tone unwavering. "While I was out there, working to provide for my family, my wife was home, finding comfort in the arms of another man," he said, his words cutting through the courtroom. The judge watched intently as the footage continued, Becca's face frozen in guilt and disbelief. The room was thick with tension as Alistair's account painted a picture of betrayal. With a final glance at Becca, Alistair turned his focus to the judge. "This is not just about a broken marriage," he continued. "It's about the years I spent away from my family, working to build a life, only to return and find that life shattered by deceit." The judge's face tightened as he watched the footage, his eyes narrowing with each passing second. Becca, sitting at the table, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She couldn't bring herself to meet anyone's gaze. Her hands trembled as the truth played out in front of the court. When the twins were born, Becca and Timothy's hopes of a future together crumbled. A DNA test had confirmed what Alistair had suspected all along. Timothy wasn't just the father of the twins, but also of Billy, the young boy Alistair had raised as his own. The revelation hit the courtroom like a hammer, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on everyone present. Alistair's voice rang out, steady and calm. "It's a 6-year affair that spanned nearly half of our marriage," he said, his gaze unwavering as he looked at Becca. "The timeline is crystal clear, and there's no denying the depth of the deceit. This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated, ongoing betrayal." Becca, still struggling to keep it together, whispered, "Alistair, please, you don't understand." But Alistair shook his head, his expression cold. "I understand perfectly." As the judge processed the evidence, Timothy sat across from him, pale and stiff. The man who had once shared jokes and casual conversations with Alistair over the backyard fence was now facing his own fate in a courtroom. Later, in a courtroom of his own, Timothy's life came crashing down. His wife, upon learning the truth, had filed for divorce without hesitation. "I had no choice," she said, looking at Timothy with a mix of anger and pity. "The truth was right there in front of me, and I can't stand to live a lie." As the courtroom grew tense, Becca tried to regain some control, her voice shaky but determined. She turned to Alistair, her face twisted in desperation. "Alistair, you have to understand," she said, her eyes welling up with false tears. "Billy needs you. You're all he's ever known as a father. I'll have to tell him that you abandoned him. How can you do that to a child?" Alistair stood motionless, his gaze unwavering. He could feel the crowd's judgment, but he kept his focus on the judge. The judge, who had been silent up until this point, cleared his throat before speaking. His voice was firm, with a hint of disdain. "Mrs. Jones," he said, addressing Becca, "the truth is that Billy's biological father is not Mr. Jones, but Timothy. Your attempts to manipulate the situation are transparent, and they will not sway this court. Billy will remain with his biological parents moving forward. I should be penalizing you for a parental fraud, but it was Mr. Jones' kindness that he does not want to drag the matter and be done with you. Looking at your behavior, I can understand why he is so kind, or I should say he just does not want to be around you." Becca's face flushed red with embarrassment, but she didn't stop. "But," the judge cut her off sharply, "it doesn't matter what lies you feed the child. It's his reality, and you are the creator of this reality. He'll be with his mother and his biological father, and there will be no emotional and financial obligation for Mr. Jones for this child." Becca's expression faltered as the judge continued, his words growing harsher. "You've shown yourself to be a poor role model for your children," the judge said, his eyes narrowing. "A mother who is more concerned with maintaining her false narrative than with the well-being of her kids. That's not a situation I take lightly." Becca opened her mouth to protest, but the judge didn't give her a chance. "To make matters clearer, CPS will be visiting the children every fortnight to monitor their mental growth until they turn 16. They will ensure that there is no attempt to manipulate the children, especially Billy. Any further attempts to undermine their emotional stability will result in them being taken from you and placed into foster care." The courtroom was dead silent now, everyone watching Becca, who was clearly struggling to keep her composure. She looked down, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I didn't mean. I just wanted to make it right," she muttered, her voice small and broken. "You've had your chances, Mrs. Jones," the judge said, his tone final. "The court has spoken. Now, focus on being a mother to your children, and stop trying to rewrite the truth." Alistair could feel a weight lifting off his shoulders as he glanced at Becca one last time, his face steady. For the first time in a long while, he felt like justice was on his side. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he was free to rebuild his life, no longer tangled in the web of lies Becca had spun. Timothy, who once joked with Alistair about mundane things, now sat in silence, absorbing the weight of his own actions. The court awarded his wife nearly everything, including a hefty alimony check. The man who once laughed in Alistair's presence was now left with nothing. No family, no future, and no peace. After the proceedings, Alistair turned to leave the courthouse, feeling a sense of finality. He had faced the truth, presented it to the world, and walked out of the courtroom with his dignity intact. He had known for a long time that the road ahead would be difficult, but now, at last, he had the freedom to rebuild his life, free from the lies that had once bound him. Now, Timothy was left with the daunting responsibility of raising 3 children and managing support payments he could never afford. Becca and Timothy were left with nothing but each other and a mountain of debt, alimony obligations, and the overwhelming challenge of raising their children without the security or trust they once took for granted. For Alistair, the outcome was everything he had hoped for. He walked out of the trial with his assets intact and his dignity restored. He had faced the truth and ensured he wouldn't be deceived any longer. The people in the courtroom saw through Becca's defenses, her attempts to portray herself as a misunderstood woman caught in an uncontrollable situation. The undeniable truth came to light, and Becca was left to face the consequences of the choices she made, whether intentional or impulsive, all those years ago. With the final judgment in his favor, Alistair took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight of suspicion, heartbreak, and betrayal had been lifted. He wasn't the blind-sided husband. He was the man who had faced it all, prepared himself, and emerged stronger. As Alistair walked out of the courthouse on that final day, his mind drifted to the future. He imagined a quiet beach, somewhere warm and bright, with the ocean stretching endlessly before him. That's where he would go next, a place where the sound of the waves would drown out the noise of the past year. The sun and salt air would heal his mind and heart, helping him put the pieces of himself back together. All he wanted now was peace, a fresh start, and the chance to reclaim his life, free from the shadows of betrayal. Finally, he was free to do just that. 3 months later, Timothy and Becca's life together quickly unraveled. What had once been a secret affair, a brief escape from the reality of their marriages, became a suffocating daily struggle. At first, they tried to convince themselves that it would work. After all, they had been lovers for years. How different could living together really be? But the cracks began to show almost immediately. Becca, desperate to hold on to what was left of her fractured world, tried to make their home a semblance of normality, but the tension between them was palpable. The arguments started small: who left the dishes out, who didn't pick up the kids from school. But soon, they grew louder, more bitter. Every disagreement was a reminder of what they had done, of the lies they had told to their families, of the children they had betrayed. The walls of their home, once filled with laughter and promise, became the stage for constant fighting. "I can't do this anymore, Becca," Timothy shouted one evening, his hands clenched at his sides. His face was red with frustration. "You think everything's fine, that we can just go on like nothing happened. But it's not. It's not." Becca stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean? This is our life now. We're together. We'll make it work." "Make it work?" Timothy scoffed, his voice bitter. "This wasn't supposed to be our life. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be your mistake." Becca's heart cracked as he said the words. But before she could respond, Timothy turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him with such force that it felt like the entire house shook. In the following days, the silence in the house was deafening. The children, too young to understand, could only feel the tension. Little Billy clung to Becca, his innocent face scrunched in confusion. "Why's new daddy always mad?" he asked one evening, his tiny voice trembling. Becca swallowed hard, unable to give him the answer. She had no explanation for the mess she had made, no way to soothe the hurt she had caused. Days turned into weeks, and Timothy was gone. Physically there, but emotionally absent. He paid his child support, as the court had mandated, but that was the extent of his involvement. The court had forced him to care for his biological children, but his presence in their lives felt like an obligation, not a choice. He wasn't there to help with homework or take them to the park. He didn't hear their laughter or offer a comforting word when they were upset. He just disappeared into the background of their lives. Becca tried to fill the gap, but it was impossible. The weight of her decisions, of her lies, felt crushing. Every day, she saw the pain in her children's eyes, the anger in Billy's gaze when he asked why Timothy never came to visit, the sadness in her daughter's voice when she said, "I wish we could be a family again, Mommy." There were nights Becca would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking herself what went wrong. She thought of the dreams she once had, of a happy family, of children growing up in a home full of love and laughter. But now those dreams felt like a cruel joke. She had destroyed everything, and there was no way to fix it. Not now, not ever. And in the silence of their broken home, she realized that her actions had stolen something from her children, something they could never get back. They would grow up without a father, without the sense of security that comes from knowing their parents are a united front. They would never experience the bond that other children had, the one that comes from a family being whole. Becca's heart broke a little more every day as she watched her kids struggle, trying to understand why the world around them had shattered. The laughter and joy that once filled their house was now replaced with an emptiness that seemed to stretch on forever. In the end, Becca's choices left more than just her marriage in ruins. They tore apart the lives of 3 children, leaving them to grow up with the scars of a broken family and a mother who couldn't undo the damage she had done. 6 months later, Becca sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as she stared at the phone in her lap. She had spent weeks trying to work up the courage to reach out to Alistair, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he would still want to talk. She knew she had hurt him. She knew what she had done. But a part of her still clung to the hope that they could find some form of understanding, even if it was just as friends. Taking a deep breath, she dialed his number and pressed the phone to her ear, her heart racing with every second that ticked by. The phone rang twice before Alistair's voice came through, calm but distant. "Hello?" Becca swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "Alistair, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know I've hurt you. I know I made mistakes. But I just wanted to talk. I need you to know I'm sorry for everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Becca could hear Alistair exhale, and it felt like he was preparing himself for something difficult. When he finally spoke, his tone was cold, detached. "I don't think there's anything left to talk about, Becca," Alistair said, his voice flat. "You made your choices, and I made mine. I don't have the energy to revisit all of that." Her chest tightened, and she fought the urge to plead with him, to make him understand how much regret she felt. "Alistair, please, I just want to apologize. For everything. I know I can't change the past, but No, Becca," Alistair interrupted, his voice growing firmer. "You don't get to come back and rewrite history. I'm not that person anymore. I've moved on." Becca felt her heart shatter at his words. She had always known he was strong, but hearing him say it like that, so final, so resolute, hit her harder than she expected. "I've moved on, Becca. I'm married now," Alistair continued, his words blunt but undeniably clear. "I've built a new life, and I don't want anything to do with you. Not now, not ever." The words hung in the air, suffocating her. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She had no response, no justification. She was just empty. After a moment, Alistair spoke again, quieter this time. "Goodbye, Becca. I hope you find peace." And just like that, the line went silent. Becca slowly lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen in disbelief. The reality of what had just happened sank in, and the weight of it crashed over her like a wave. There was no second chance, no forgiveness, no way back. Alistair was gone from her life, and in a way, he always had been. She had destroyed that connection long ago, and now, there was nothing left but the painful consequences of her own actions. She sat there, alone in her car, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the full force of her loneliness. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
There's an old saying that loose lips sink ships. Sometimes the best way to resolve a problem or a situation is to wait it out. The problem we humans have is that we are so busy trying to push the situation to get the problem behind us that we lose sight of what's right in front of us. After 3 years of marriage, my loving wife had filed for a divorce while I was on a 2-week run in the farthest corner of the company's sales territory. We sold computers to set up to run certain lines of equipment. I was one of the few that could also install them. As a result, I had been sent in to set 3 new installments up. In the divorce petition was the reason why she had filed. According to a third-party statement, I was having an ongoing affair with her father's secretary. It was humorous because his secretary worked at his state capitol office. That was 275 miles roughly from where we lived in Jackson, Missouri. It made it sound like I was taking 2 days a week to travel to the Capitol to stay overnight in a hotel and drive back the next day. Upon my first day back, I was fired. No reason was given, but I was paid what was due according to the state's labor laws. I believed but could not prove it was because of what was being claimed by my wife in her divorce petition. My boss and my wife's family were members of the same community church. I smelled a setup. I had only met my father-in-law's secretary once, and that was during our formal engagement party. She had tried to come on to me, and I had shut her down. Someone had seen the chance for advantage and went for it. The question was who and why now. Rachel's father was more of a follower than a man who could stand on his own. He got into politics only when his father had decided to retire. His great-grandfather, a career politician, had known when the interstate was going to be built and had bought the land around it all throughout the state. He had one rule. He only leased the land for development. When the lease ran out, the improvements torn down ready for new development. The family ended up using some to develop their own in chain and bought other businesses. When he died, the family was super rich as a result, and had continued on as he did. It was almost like a golden parachute for the whole family. He had won the seat in a landslide and had kept it ever since. It hadn't even been a week since I had been served in here. We were standing before Judge Donald MacDonald. I had not even hired a lawyer and was sleeping at a friend's place until I got back on my feet. My wife's lawyer, a well-known feminist who was from state capital, wanted to get the court moving towards the divorce. Even to the judge, this just seemed to be rushed, and he wondered why. He was hoping to find something that would slow down the plaintiff's rush for judgment. It gave us both reasons for wanting to slow things down. What had stuck out right away was that my wife's lawyer had scheduled the first appointment before the judge the same day she filed. I listened with interest to what she had to say in her opening statement. The judge then asked me what I had to say. Your Honor, two things have happened. First of all, we are all here before you because of hearsay. There is no proof. As for my wife Rachel and I, as far as I knew, everything was fine, I said. Secondly, I believe it's primarily because my wife Rachel is about to come into the rest of her family trust. Under state law, when that happens, I automatically would be entitled to half if we got divorced. How soon is that going to happen? The judge asked. On her 25th birthday, which in less than 6 months away, I said. The judge picked up the petition and read the complaint through in full for the first time. After pausing for a few, he said, Mr. Richards, do you have anything further to add? Only that my former boss is my wife's father's best friend. They, like my wife and I, are members of the same church. When I returned from my last sales trip, I was terminated, and no reason was given. I explained. I request that my wife be forced to pay my lost wages until this is resolved. Her current trust is worth $10 million and is still being controlled by her father. On her next birthday, she gets full access to the rest, which will bring the total amount up to $100 million. At that time, according to the way the trust was set up, her father also loses his control over it. The judge turned to the feminist lawyer and asked, Do you wish to dispute the facts that were just explained to me, Ms. Livingston? No, Your Honor, that's why I filed, because the wife feels that there is no way they as a couple can work their differences out. Ms. Livingston explained. The judge saw me smiling. Any further thoughts, Mr. Richards? Only one, Your Honor, I said. My wife is 6 weeks pregnant with our first child, and I think that she is being influenced by others because of my point of view. Having perked the judge's interest, he said, Explain further, please. My wife's family and friends are all politically aligned with one party's point of view. I am an independent with more of a conservative point of view, I said. I feel her extended family are afraid that I am going to expose our unborn child to my point of view. With the political environment we are living with, the fact that hearsay is being used implies that this may be the very cause. There's no proof of that, Your Honor, Ms. Livingston said with excitement. You can't allow hearsay to be used in court. The judge looked at me with a big smile, then turned to my wife's lawyer. You're right, Ms. Livingston, we can't accept hearsay. That is why you're going to get the lady who provided the statement to appear before me so she can give the names of the party and their legal addresses who claim to witness these things happening. I want them so I can subpoena them so they can testify before me in court, the judge said in anger. And since Mr. Richards, as you have pointed out, has been evicted from his own house and fired because of those same influences that started this, I'm ordering Mrs. Richards to pay him $5,000 a month temporary support, retroactive from the day this was filed before the court, so his first payment is due. Your Honor, you can't do this, Ms. Livingston said. The witness lives and works in the Capitol. Was your client's husband allowed to get anything out of the house? Did his wife confront him with the accusation? Judge Donald asked. No, Your Honor, to both questions, she replied. This statement was just recently obtained. By whom? You acted just like a politician, saw a chance to earn $1 and take advantage of a situation to affect the outcome. Judge MacDonald said firmly. Come back and hear again, Ms. Livingston, with a divorce that appears to be over the difference of views of those outsides of the family itself, and I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, she said meekly. Ms. Livingston, in my court, I expect both parties to physically present, so have her here the next time you appear. One more question, who is paying your bill? The judge asked. John Brownstone, she answered. The local representative for the State House, the judge said, who spends 90% of his time at the state capitol. Yes, Your Honor, I said. He's my father-in-law. How do you get along? The judge asked. We tolerate each other, I said. When he starts talking about making the country a socialist country, I leave the room. We both know each other's views, and I see his conduct as trying to put a wedge between my wife and I. So, you haven't talked to your wife since you have been served? The judge said. No, Your Honor. I did swing by the house to talk to her, but learned from the security hired by her father to watch the place that she was out of town and that the locks had been changed. She has either changed her phone number or blocked me. Ms. Livingston, where is Mrs. Richards currently residing? The judge asked. In the Capitol, with her father. Ms. Livingston responded. I see this is looking more and more like a hit job to me. Looks like Mr. Richards' view of things is exactly what is happening. I expect you both to appear before me a week from today at 9 a.m. The court is adjourned. The judge said. I showed up in court with a lawyer this time. I could see my wife Rachel sitting beside Ms. Livingston and a lady I did not know. After taking the bench, Judge Donald McDonald went right to work. Ms. Livingston, has the defendant being paid the court-ordered alimony? The judge asked. No, Your Honor. Her father is refusing to allow it to be paid out of the trust. Ms. Livingston replied. Let me address your client directly and have her answer through the mic. The judge said. Mrs. Richards, you are of legal age, are you not? Judge Donald asked. Yes, I am, Rachel replied. Where are you residing at this time? The judge asked. With my father at the house in Jefferson, Rachel replied. You are living off of your trust right now. What were you using for money these last 5 years? My husband and I both worked very hard. We did not need to touch the trust. 5 weeks ago, I told my father that I wanted some of the trust money to remodel one of the bedrooms into a nursery. Rachel explained. He decided I should quit my job because I could use the trust money. My husband said no, we can make it on our own. My father said he didn't want anything affecting the birth of the child, and my working may do that. This letter used to file from a divorce. How did you come in possession of it? The judge asked. My father said it was mailed to his office, and he brought it to me. Did your father out and out refuse to write the check from the trust for support? The judge asked. No. He said I should refuse to settle or pay anything until all the lawyers have worked everything out. Rachel said. So, since we need both our signatures on any trust check, he just refused to sign. Bad mistake, Mrs. Richards. I'm holding you in contempt of court. Officer, escort the lady to jail as soon as this hearing is over. What your father says or does has nothing to do with this case. You, in my eyes, are an adult and will be treated accordingly. Mrs. Richards, I order you to turn over possession of the marital home to Mr. Richards since you are not residing there. He helped pay for it, so he has just as much right to be there as you. Ms. Livingstone, if Mr. Richards is not back in his home by 4 this afternoon, I will hold you responsible. I looked at my wife as her face turned white. It was fun watching her have to deal with the fact that her father's wisdom had led her directly to jail. There was no way her dad could get here before the end of the court day, which meant Rachel would be exposed to a world she had never seen. Ms. Livingston was beginning to realize that she was not dealing with a liberal-minded judge. Ms. Livingston, I presume the other lady is the one that wrote the notarized hearsay letter claiming that there was an affair, so have her approach the mic. Name, age, occupation, and address, please. The judge said. Nora Charles, 34, an office clerk at the Capitol. She said before disclosing her address. Do you have the names and addresses I requested? The judge asked. Yes. How do you know these ladies? The judge asked, having a pretty good idea of what she was going to say. I work with them at the Capitol. She responded. She then walked up and handed him the list. Handing the paper to a clerk, he said, have the subpoenas drawn up and served. All charges are to be assigned to the plaintiff. Ms. Livingston was livid. She had never seen a judge act like him. Are there any further items to bring up today? The judge asked. How long will Mrs. Richards be held? Until someone presents this court with the alimony for this and next month's support. The judge said. Your Honor, that's not fair. Surely there is some wiggle room here. Ms. Livingston said. It appears that the only reason any of us are here is because of the conduct of a father who can't stay out of his daughter's business. The judge said firmly. It's obvious this situation is really all about the trust Mrs. Richards is coming into. Her father sees himself losing his control over it and her. He also seems to believe that if you don't live with the same views of things, you're a danger to his influence over his adult daughter. Therefore, Ms. Livingston, get to this court by next Friday a copy of Mrs. Richards' trust. The court is dismissed. I watched the court officer escort my wife out of the court across the street to the county jail. I knew it had to be humbling for her. The problem was she was constantly pulled by her father to help further his political career. I had refused to allow her to become the social butterfly he required. By marrying his daughter, I had brought an end to his eager pawn. For the first time in her life, she had to live within a budget. I realized that he had been slowly drawing her back into her former lifestyle. While I was on my last sales trip, he had gone for the kill. Everybody had underestimated the judge except for me. I had noticed Rachel that first year at Southeast Missourian University. Who wouldn't? She was a real looker. I knew that the men would be lining up to get the chance to date her, and I was right. With long black hair, a slender softy body whose natural curves drew you, and she could easily capture a man's attention and did. She had a too trusting personality which, if taken advantage of, could cause a lot of problems. She seemed to be involved in all social or political activities. It was and never would be my cup of tea. I had more important things to do. I had to work to eat and for room and board. For my parents, my borrowing the funds to attend school was too much. We were taught from being young to find a way to pay our way. It took 4 years, but I graduated with honors, just barely making it. There were rumors not proved that her graduation certificate was bought and paid for. 6 months later, John Brownstone was doing a tour with his daughter in a plant where I was installing the latest computer system and programming it. She strolled over to introduce herself, and when I got up to say hello, I was welcomed with the greatest smile. "Hi, David, we went to school together, but I never saw you outside of class," Rachel said. "We thought you were an introvert." "No, I had to work full-time to get through school," I disclosed. So, between school, studying, and full-time work hours, my social life got set to the side. Since then, I have lived as cheap as possible to cut down my student debt as much as possible. "Will you be in Cape Girardeau on Friday?" she asked. "Yes, I work out of Cape, so I still live there," I said. "I should be finished setting this new system tonight. I will spend tomorrow making sure it's all working before heading back." "Applebee's Friday is 7 then?" Rachel said. "It's a date," I replied. About an hour and a half later, just as I was finishing up, the general manager came over and told me that the representative's daughter had been asking questions about me. I told him that we had gone to school together but associated with different crowds. He smiled and said, "There's something in you that she's attracted to, young man, so be careful because that lady is marriage material." We met and the evening went well. We went to a bar along the University Row and had a few dances. I guess she got upset when I didn't ask her for a second date. When she asked her friends what was wrong with her, they told her the simple truth. He still sees you as belonging to a separate world. He has worked hard to get where he is. You haven't worked an honest day in your life, nor do you appear to want to. He's at the point where he's ready to settle down and start a family. That means joint responsibility and an approach to life you don't have. You're still spreading your wings and living like nothing means anything. It had upset her family when she took a job, got an apartment, and started living in the real world like everyone else. It didn't take long for her to realize that she had no clue about how the real world worked. For Rachel, it was a life-changing experience. She was learning at her age what it was like to do the basics like cooking, dishes, and laundry. We all saw her struggle with normal things we do in life as she learned them as an adult. Some of her high-class friends dumped her as a result. They couldn't understand what she meant when she told them they needed to get off their privileged life and discover the reality of most. It had been a rough 6 months, but I had noticed she was adjusting. So, one Saturday, I saw her in the mall sitting on a bench looking sad and lost in thought. I went over and sat down beside her. "Rachel, there's a community dance being held on the fairgrounds tonight. Would you like to go with me?" I asked. "Why now?" she asked in complete surprise. "Because you now understand the world I live in and can see some of the phoniness of yours," I said. "As a result, you have grown up a lot the hard way. You have shown great courage and determination these past few months and have earned my respect." We learned that night that we both love to dance. It was fun to see her actually enjoy herself without having any airs influencing her. She asked me on the way home why she'd been accepted by so many without question. I said, "Because you were just being yourself. For a person with your upbringing, that speaks volumes." As I walked her to her apartment door, we kissed for the first time. It wasn't long until we were seen as a couple. Her mother was thrilled with the changes in her daughter. It amazed her to find out that she had learned to be a pretty damn good cook. Her father was another story. He was not impressed that his daughter was becoming a well-balanced adult woman. He hated me because I would not discuss politics with him. One night, out of frustration, he went at me. His wife and daughter were shocked when I went at him, using his own arguments against him like the skilled politician he thought he was. Later, privately, Rachel's mother warned us that her husband hated to be made to look like a fool. "David, he expected you to fold because he thought you knew nothing. He was not prepared for the facts that came from your lips. He thought you were a shallow person. You proved you're not. He will hold a grudge until it forces him to try to take you down." I had learned young that power and influence earned was always respected by the one earning it. When being handed it on a silver platter, it became a tool to keep others under your control, and it became corrupted. It had been at my parents' place on Christmas Eve that I got down on my knee and presented the ring to her. Less than a year later, we were married. Her father wanted to make it the biggest event of the year. Rachel had shot that down fast. It was Monday afternoon before I went to see her. Rachel needed that time to think things out. Judge McDonald had done us all a favor by throwing her in jail. Her high and mighty father couldn't get to her now. Her mother had always been a buffer for us from him until they got divorced. I watched her walk in looking sad and depressed until she saw who her visitor was. Seeing it was me, she broke into a smile as the tears started to flow. Sitting down across from me, she said, "He did it again, didn't he?" "Looks like it," I replied. "I was told you had filed because of your affair," Rachel said. "When did you figure it all out?" "When Ms. Livingston had to reveal who was paying her bill," I said. "What's behind all of my dad's actions? It has to be more than just revenge against you?" Rachel said, "To me, it boils down to something that must be hidden in the trust." I said, "Because for some reason he wants our marriage ended before it fully takes effect." "When did you figure it out?" I asked. "You got to understand that being pregnant has got my emotions working irrationally at times. Dad broke the phony news of your affair and I lost it." Rachel said, "If he put something in front of me, I signed it because I was upset over losing you. This weekend out of boredom I read all the documents. When I read that it was Dad's secretary that you're accused of sleeping with, I knew he had set us up. So, what are you going to do after you get released from jail?" I said with a big grin. Going home with my hubby after telling my father we are done. Rachel said. Remind me to tell my mother about his latest stunt. I'm just glad we figured it out before our marriage was destroyed, I said. Thanks for not saying I was a fool for falling for his bullshit, Rachel said. If you were half the man you are, you still would be a better man than my father. David, always remember that I fell in love with the man you are. Don't ever change. It's you that keeps me grounded. Mom said you coming into my life made me a better and different person. She was right. My value and outlook about things have changed so much. I am so mad at myself for allowing myself to be drawn back into the bullshit. I went and visited my wife every day until Friday. We talked about everything. Rachel and I were surprised to learn that the judge did not want us sitting with our lawyers when we appeared before him this morning. The sheriff's department officer who told us said the judge does not want us identified before certain people are required to testify. As a result, my wife would be deliberately held back and would arrive late in her everyday clothing. Rachel and I walked hand in hand the Friday morning from the county jail and slid into the back of the courtroom just as Judge McDonald took his seat. I see the three ladies who claim to have witnessed the romantic relationship of David Richards are here, the judge said. I would like them to go stand beside him if he is here in this court. Rachel and I watched as the three ladies went over and stood beside a man sitting with her father, John Brownstone. David Richards, will you please approach the bench? The judge requested. The room went into shock as I stood up and joined the man the ladies had pointed out heading to the bench. When we both had almost reached him, he told us to stop. Rachel Richards, would you come forward and identify which man is your husband? The judge asked. Rachel came forward. Her eyes and face were smiling big time. Once she reached us, she stood beside me, taking my hand into hers. It appears that these three ladies had witnessed an affair by someone using David's name in a deliberate attempt to destroy his marriage and ruin his life. The judge said before going on. The question came to me was who would benefit from having this marriage break up? Who had the financial means to pay for it? I had to ask myself why. Those reasons were why I ordered that a copy of the trust be supplied to my office. I had a trust lawyer review it. Stan Johnson, can you step forward and testify what you learned? Rachel looked at me and whispered, do you know anything? I whispered back, no. Putting all the legalese into common language, there is a clause that says if Rachel Brownstone is not married by her 25th birthday, full control goes to her father until she reaches the age of 40. He said, since she is, it has legally been hers since the day she got married. Not has only the court been scammed, but it appears that Rachel has too. Stan, send a copy to the Attorney General office. Inform him of what we now know. Since John Brownstone is our state representative, it should be his office that investigates the situation to see if criminal charges should be laid. The judge said, does the plaintiff have something to say? Yes, Your Honor, I do. Rachel said, I wish to withdraw my petition for divorce. Granted. Judge McDonald said, hire Stan to get your trust legally in your hands. The court is dismissed. We watched the man claiming to be me taken in for questioning, along with her father who looked defeated. Ms. Livingston handed me the envelope containing the $10,000. Mr. Richards, you could probably sue your father-in-law for a lot more than this. Ms. Livingston said, I wonder how much they were all paid to try to get the divorce done. We don't have to, Rachel said. He has just written himself out of his grandchildren's lives forever. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Tom was laboring over fresh test data, a tedious yet essential task for him and his team's month-long effort on the test vehicle. Despite its dullness, he found himself correlating and tabulating the information for analysis. Mid-task, his phone buzzed with a text notification, but he paid little attention to the sender's identity. Only after a pause in his work did he glance away from the screen and notice the alert. Curiosity piqued, he picked up his phone, revealing an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Though tempted to dismiss it as spam, he reconsidered, wondering if it might be a colleague's unregistered cell number. Upon opening the message, his initial confusion turned to shock as he found an explicit image displayed on his screen. It took a moment for him to process the unexpected content, a close-up of a woman's private parts, clearly showing recent ejaculation. Reading the accompanying text, look closely, you still have time. Bradley's, 6 p.m. He initially dismissed it as a misdirected attempt at solicitation, finding a hint of amusement in the situation. However, a closer examination of the image revealed a tiny detail that froze him in disbelief, a mole near the woman's private parts, unmistakably belonging to his wife, Tanya. Doubt flooded his mind as he desperately sought to disprove what he saw, but the evidence only strengthened his conviction. Questions raced through his mind as he recalled Tanya's supposed whereabouts, en route to Boston for a crucial work engagement. Yet, here he was, confronted with an image that suggested otherwise. With the clock ticking towards 5:15 p.m., the timing of the message clashed with Tanya's scheduled landing in Boston at 4:30 p.m. Although she typically checked in upon arrival, it seemed plausible that she was preoccupied with her team's arrangements. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, Tom opted to reply to the text first, before considering further action. Not particularly original, but entirely expected. "Who is this? How did you obtain this image? Am I expected to meet you at Bradley's?" As he prepared to wrap up for the day, he made a firm decision to head to Bradley's. He was determined to get answers one way or another, sending a text to Tanya. "How was your flight? I'm going out for a bite. Give me a call when you're available." He aimed to keep things low-key and gather information discreetly. Walking toward his car, his phone buzzed once more. Assuming it was Tanya, he checked his phone, only to find a response from the mystery sender. "I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting than me." Feeling overwhelmed, he hurried to his car while checking the map on his phone. Bradley's was 30 minutes away, and it was already 5:40. He'd arrived shortly after 6 p.m., uncertain of the importance of timing, but hoping he wouldn't miss whoever the texter expected him to meet. During the ride, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Tanya. "Crazy time with the team. We'll call you later before bed. Love you." He pushed thoughts of their conversation aside. His focus was on his meeting at Bradley's and the mystery surrounding the texter's knowledge of his wife. Arriving at 6:12, his heart raced as he parked. Since the texter hadn't provided any clues about who to look for, he assumed whoever wanted to meet knew him and would approach him. Yet, it was the mention of someone more interesting being present that troubled him most. The texter seemed privy to information he didn't possess, and he feared walking into a trap without any other means of uncovering the truth. The image of his wife's carnal parts left him in turmoil. He trusted her completely, and their closeness was satisfying, or so he thought. But the only explanation for someone possessing such an image was troubling, and he was minutes away from discovering the truth, a prospect that filled him with dread. Stepping inside, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. Unfamiliar with the pub's layout, he paused by the entrance to survey the surroundings. A spacious dining area lay ahead, with a bar to his left. Choosing a seat near the end of the bar, he ordered a draft and scanned the dining area. His attention was drawn to a man who had just taken his drink order and was making his way across the room toward a table of smiling individuals. And there, at the table, receiving a drink from the well-dressed man, sat Tanya, adorned in her little black dress and pearls, her smile radiant. He moved mechanically, advancing toward the table where Tanya sat. Just a couple of steps away, her expression shifted from a warm smile to wide-eyed fear upon seeing him. Undeterred, Tom continued, reaching the table and seizing a handful of the well-dressed man's hair with his left hand. He yanked back forcefully, causing the man to drop his drinks and stumble backward, yelping in pain. As Tom pulled him past, he released his grip, intending to strike him with his right hand. But the man's rapid retreat left Tom out of range, and he landed on the floor before Tom could act further. Taking a step toward him, Tom recognized Pete and sternly warned him to stay down. Pete, disheveled and soaked in drink, obeyed without uttering a word. Turning back to Tanya, Tom noticed the table had fallen silent. Familiar faces stared back at him, members of Tanya's team, who had shared meals and gatherings at his home. He mused that team loyalty outweighed betrayal, except for one individual who had chosen to reveal the truth. Briefly considering identifying them, he dismissed the idea as futile. Tom informed Tanya that he was going home and suggested that if there was any hope for their marriage, she should come with him now. Tanya nodded in response. However, before she could rise, he gestured for her to wait and requested a moment. Before departing, he addressed Betty Wilson and Bob Thornton, seated nearby. He asked Betty if Bill thought she was in Boston, and Bob if Alice believed the same. Their avoidance confirmed his suspicions. He pondered whether the whole team was involved, realizing that at least one of them was. The drive home was a blur, ending abruptly in his driveway. Inside, he grabbed a beer and sank into the living room, contemplating his acquaintances. Familiar with Bill Wilson and Alice Thornton, but unfamiliar with the other couples present. With uncertainty gnawing at him, he debated contacting Bob or Alice, but ultimately decided against it. Instead, he sent them a brief message. Just heard Tanya's travel plans changed. Might want to touch base. With that, he left the choice of further investigation in their hands, feeling a sense of closure amidst the chaos. It was roughly 20 minutes later when he heard the garage door open and Tanya pull into the garage. He waited in the living room. She entered, still dressed in her LBD, but without the provocative pumps and jewelry. As she calmly walked into the living room and took a seat opposite him on the sofa, he remained quiet, understanding the power of silence in any conversation. He was resolute in allowing the silence to persist for as long as necessary. It didn't take Tanya long to speak up. "It's not what you think," she began, but he gestured for her to stop. "You have no clue what I think about tonight's events," Tom replied. "I don't need a detailed explanation. We're both engineers, and we know that there's no real or objective answer to any why question. It's often just an attempt to justify unfavorable outcomes, so I won't ask why. Let's start with something simpler. How long? How many times? How frequently? Do our friends know, apart from those at the table who cheat? Am I labeled as your betrayed man among your work colleagues and our friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that at all," Tanya protested. "Our team's travel plans got disrupted, and instead of coming home only to travel again tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay in town for a down day before resuming." "I didn't see the whole team there. Where was everyone else?" Tom inquired. "When we received the news, some of the team chose to stay home one more night and meet us at the airport tomorrow," she admitted. "But you chose to deceive me," he pointed out. "You seemed rather close to Pete. Is there anything happening between the star engineer and the Wunderkind program manager that you'd like to tell me?" "Well, for one, Pete's all right, and he persuaded the owners at Bradley's not to press charges," she said in a positive tone. His eyes widened in utter disbelief at her loyalty. "I couldn't care less about your colleague. If he hadn't tripped, I would have punched him. Whether charges are pressed doesn't faze me. I've spent a night in jail before. It's irrelevant. Besides, it could make for interesting testimony," he added with a half smile. "Do you love him?" Tanya paused, gathering her thoughts. He could tell she was contemplating. Yes, silence was indeed a powerful tool, and his mind raced to fill the void in their conversation. Again, this didn't seem like it would end well. "He's not my boyfriend. There's absolutely nothing between us. Yes, I should have informed you about the change in plans, but it seemed trivial. Whether I was in town or Boston, you weren't expecting me, and I was still committed to the team. We were simply having dinner before retiring to our rooms. There was no reason for you to act the way you did. You completely embarrassed me in front of my team," she exclaimed, attempting to bluff her way out of the situation. He unlocked his phone, pulled up the text, and pushed it across the coffee table to her. Judging by her expression, he could tell she recalled the picture and the situation, leaving no room for denial. This time, she started speaking without bravado. He retrieved the phone, started a voice recording app, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Tom, our team is—" she hesitated, searching for words. "Very close-knit in many ways. Most of us," she began. "We have a small group that meets regularly. They were all at Bradley's. We were the ones putting in extra effort for the proposal. You know the time I've spent preparing our pitch? I don't know exactly when it began. It was sometime after Pete became PM. We worked closely together, and I was drawn to him, and things just evolved," Tanya explained. "No explanations needed," he interrupted. "Falling into bed doesn't just happen. Decisions are made consciously. We both understand that, so please don't insult me." "So, almost 6 months," he answered one of his questions. "That's when Pete joined, right?" She nodded. "The team," he continued. "All of you." He trailed off without naming it. "I mean, collectively?" She nodded again. "Pete mentioned it fosters trust and team unity. Is that what convinced all of you to form a company coalition group? Now you're being crude. It's more than that. I feel a strong connection to Pete and my team, more than ever," Tanya asserted confidently. He sensed trouble brewing. "Unfortunately, you may see some changes in your team soon," Tom warned. "What did you do?" Tanya gasped. "Tom, involving others will only cause more damage. Let them make their own choices. We need to focus on us. Tanya, I can't stay silent and be complicit. I care about Bob and Alice. In fact, I like them a lot more than Betty and Bill right now, he replied. I texted them about the changed plans. How they handle it with their spouses is up to them. I can live with my decision. Tom, we have the most productive team in Cramerica Inc.'s history, she practically yelled at him. And you benefited too. Just because our team meetings were on Wednesdays didn't mean you missed out. I never denied you access to me whenever you needed it. So, I slept with my team a bit earlier. You never noticed. That picture you showed me, you want to know about it? She sneered. That was right after Pete finished inside me. Yes, he came inside your loving wife. What you don't see is Betty. She took the picture just before she went down on me. So now you know you never had seconds or tasted another man's seed. If you don't know, it didn't happen, right? Tom listened in shock as the extent of the deception and his own ignorance unfolded before him. Now just because you're aware, just because your fragile ego is bruised, you want to throw away all that my team and I have achieved? Tanya hissed, her anger escalating. Tom could feel his heart rate rising as Tanya passionately defended her team's questionable dynamic. His own anger was growing by the second. For a fleeting moment during his drive home from Bradley's, he entertained the idea that perhaps forgiving Pete just this once could be possible. However, that notion had quickly met its demise. He didn't need to hear any more, and he certainly didn't want to, but Tanya persisted. No, sir, we won't let you off the hook. You're going to text Bob and Alice back, informing them that you heard from me and that we were stranded in Atlanta but have reservations for the morning. That's the story Betty and Bill will stick to, and you're going to support them, damn it, she shouted. There are millions on the line with this deal, and your hurt feelings mean absolutely nothing. Send the text, and then we can discuss our next steps. Discuss our next steps? Tom retorted. There's no discussing it. You're leaving. Now, you and your twisted team, including your ringleader Pete, can carry on however you like. We're finished. I'll be contacting a lawyer this week to get the ball rolling. It's a straightforward 50-50 split. You keep your retirement, and I'll keep mine, Tom declared. But go. You have reservations in town. Use them. Head off to Boston and chalk up another victory for you and your team. Tom, please send those texts, Tanya pleaded, her tone much softer now. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions. You and I could miss out on tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just imagine all the places we could go with that money. Just you and me. Forget about this and reclaim my loyalty. Please, Tom, don't let some irrational concern about meaningless encounters derail us. Pete says I'm on the fast track to executive status. All I have to do is keep delivering results for a few more years. Don't you want that for me? For us? She implored. Tanya, just leave, Tom managed to say before he was struck hard in the back, knocking the wind out of him as he fell to the floor with a knee pressed into his back. Don't hurt him, Tanya interjected. Too much, she added. So, still undecided about breaking my nose? Pete taunted as he leaned in close to Tom's face while Tom lay pinned on the floor. Tanya must have a bug, Tom thought. Now I know whose team she's really on. We'll see whose nose gets broken, Pete smirked. Get his damn phone and type those damn texts for him. We don't have time for this nonsense. Someone pulled him up from the floor. Just one individual. He pretended to be injured, causing the person behind him to exert significant force to assist him to stand. This provided him with necessary information. His captor was a weak office worker, wheezing from the effort to get Tom on his feet. Tom was catching his breath after being taken by surprise and was refocusing on the situation. In contrast to Pete and his team of well-groomed salespeople, Tom's team operated in the field with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, SOAR, based in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, although his group of engineers didn't match their caliber. Spending time with the crews during test missions led to the team being invited to improve their physical condition under the guidance of seasoned workers flown to missions in aircraft modified by Tom's team. If these men appeared at your doorstep, it meant the end of your days on Earth. Tom and his team designed the equipment necessary to access and, more importantly, exit hazardous locations. They took pride in their modifications, contributing to successful missions and the safe return of all involved. The members of the 160th and their formidable passengers deeply appreciated the hard work put in by Tom's crew, with Master Sergeant Troy Baker standing out as the most intimidating figure. MSGT Baker was renowned within his community. Everyone, from recruits to high-ranking officers, showed him the respect he deserved for guiding his men through missions worldwide. He was known for never leaving anyone behind. This reputation was solidified during a mission in Colombia. MSGT Baker instructed the young LT platoon leader to stick close. During their first mission, when the FARC ambushed their group, MSGT Baker thought the LT was performing well for a rookie until he saw him on the ground bleeding from a head wound. The medic reported that he had checked for vitals and mentioned that he was gone top. Baker knelt down and lifted him into a fireman's carry, with the medic reiterating that he was gone top. Baker responded to the medic's observation, stating that it might be true, but he was still coming home with them. The medic looked at him as if he had lost his mind, considering the more than 5-kilometer trek back to the LZ through dense forest. They would be fortunate to return unscathed, but carrying a deceased individual seemed like a risky decision. Anticipating the medic's thoughts, Baker assured him, "I'd do the same for you, Billy. Stay close in case I need you." What ensued became legendary. Upon their return to the base, the medic informed the doctor that the LT had succumbed. The doctor nodded and retrieved a penlight from his pocket. The medic watched in amazement as the dead LT's pupils contracted in the harsh beam of the penlight. The doc then asked the medic if he cared to revise his diagnosis as they hurried the revived LT into surgery. He was timeless. He didn't speak much, but when he did, everyone listened. He was a relic. In an age of convenience and disposability, he was neither. He was meticulously crafted and unique, and he seemed to hold a special regard for Tom and his team. During the extended periods of downtime between missions, the MSGT expressed his gratitude by instructing Tom and the team in some basic yet effective hand-to-hand defensive techniques. He advised the engineers, "It's better to know something, just in case. I understand the biggest threat you're likely to encounter is a malfunctioning copier or a nasty paper cut, but if you remain in this line of work, you may find yourself in some colorful locations. So, now if you happen to encounter one of the local colorful inhabitants, you'll have something practical to rely on," MSGT Baker explained to the group. "But let's hope a paper cut remains the scariest thing you ever have to face." Tom regulated his breathing and allowed himself to appear subdued in the grasp of his captor, while recalling the fighting techniques taught by the MSGT. There might be situations where you feel powerless and can only endure the smacking. It's unfortunate, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you're taking a smacking, you can still fight back. You just have to outsmart your attacker. Tom remembered the lesson and subtly resisted, gradually wearing down the lone man's strength. "Give me the phone, Tom," Pete demanded, staring him down. "Now you know I've been with your wife and that every guy on the team has had their way with her. Forget this tough guy act, Tom. You're nothing but a weak, submissive nerd. Do as we say, and maybe you'll still have a chance with Tanya when the team isn't using her. Don't forget about all the luxuries you can afford with her bonus. That should ease the pain. Who knows, maybe Tanya will even buy you a cohesion robot for those times when she's busy." Tom bit his tongue as Pete took pleasure in humiliating him and coercing him into compliance. Pete demanded to know where it was, spotting the outline of the phone in Tom's shirt pocket. He then reached for it with his right hand. Tom forcefully stepped back with his right heel, striking his captor's shin and causing him to stumble in pain. Flexing his arms, Tom broke free from the hold as his captor yelped and collapsed under his own weight. Pete's eyes widened in recognition. With his right arm extended straight out, Tom rolled his shoulder as taught by the MSGT, driving his clenched fist into the center of Pete's face with full force. He felt bones shatter beneath his fist as a gush of blood poured from Pete's nose, sending him crashing to the floor. He turned around to identify his assailant. It was Bill, lying on the floor in tears and clutching his leg. He whimpered that he thought his foot was broken. Tom forcefully stomped on his foot, causing Bill to scream in agony. Tom remarked that it should clear up any uncertainty. Turning his attention back, he saw Pete on the floor, hands covering his face, attempting to rise to his knees. Approaching him, Tom leaned in close to his ear and mentioned that it looked like his nose took the punch, adding that he wasn't willing to take one for the team. He then delivered a powerful punch to Pete's temple, knocking him out cold. His adrenaline pumping and breath ragged, Tom scanned the living room for Tanya. Suddenly, he felt a sharp impact to his back and neck. Dropping to one knee, he spun around to confront the new attacker. Tanya stood before him, wielding a cast-iron skillet. Her swing missed, grazing Tom's side. Rising to his feet, he roughly grabbed the pan from her hand. Tanya pleaded with Tom, expressing that they could still salvage the situation. She asked him to consider the money he would be giving up and promised to put an end to the extramarital affairs, vowing to cut them off. She suggested going back to how things were between them. Rubbing the back of his head with his left hand, Tom stared at her, astonished by her sudden transformation. He compared her to the shape-shifting alien in John Carpenter's The Thing. Adapting to each new challenge, he smirked at the thought. Misinterpreting his smile as agreement, Tanya moved to embrace Tom. He held her back with his left hand, then, after a brief moment of consideration, swiftly struck her nose with his right hand, fracturing bone but not rendering her unconscious. Tanya cried out and slumped to the floor. Tom remarked that it hurt like hell, describing tears streaming, vision blurred, breathing labored, and blood everywhere, stating that it worked every time. Tanya expressed her distress, questioning Tom's motive for punching her. Tom, unapologetic, explained that he struck her because he had the ability to do so. He continued recording the incident, convinced that he had enough evidence to justify his actions, despite the potential negative portrayal. Reflecting on the advice received from the MSGT about decisive action, Tom surveyed the room, noting Bill's distressed state and Tanya's attempts to stem the bleeding from her nose. In motion while others remained still, Tom acknowledged the success of saving someone, giving credit to the MSGT. Discussing the aftermath, Tom expressed frustration about the consequences for Lover Boy and Mr. Bill, lamenting the missed opportunities and potential financial losses. He contemplated the implications of involving the police, deciding to delay the call to maintain his chance to question Tanya. Kneeling beside her, Tom demonstrated how to address her nosebleed, but as the adrenaline subsided, he felt a sudden loss of energy, sitting across from the woman he thought he knew. Questioning her actions, Tom wondered about the true extent of Tanya's deception, expressing disappointment in the betrayal. He inquired about her aspirations, specifically regarding her ambition to become a vice president. Tanya admitted that it could have been worthwhile if Tom had gone along with her plans, expressing regret for the setback caused by the incident. Tom pressed further, questioning the future of their relationship and the persistence of deceit, to which Tanya acknowledged the possibility and the potential continuation of dishonesty. Tom discovered from Tanya that Pete had warned her about his rigid ethics and idealistic views, advising her to break free from his influence to achieve success. In response to Tom's question about when Pete conveyed this advice, Tanya retorted, insinuating his lack of knowledge about certain aspects of her relationship with Pete. Despite Tom's silence, Tanya continued, sharing her perspective on career advancement. She revealed that adhering to Tom's suggestions for career enhancement yielded only a few commendations, and it wasn't until Betty offered guidance that she learned what truly worked for women in the workplace. Tanya asserted that engaging in carnal relationships for career advancement was not only effective, but also more enjoyable. Tom, still recording the conversation, processed this information. Curious about the timeline of Tanya's actions, Tom inquired if her involvement in such activities began before Pete entered the picture. Tanya, expressing impatience with Tom's comprehension, disclosed that she initiated such actions at the company's Christmas party a year after joining Cramerica, emphasizing her commitment to this approach ever since. "Wait, you're sleeping with the boss too? Art? Art Vandelay?" Tom asked incredulously. "Yes, Tom, Art, Pete, Bill. Anyone on the team who could help advance my career. It doesn't cost me anything to share some closeness, and it's easy to manipulate you men when I can lead you around by your desires, especially you. Show a bit of cleavage, and I could guide you wherever I needed," she stated. "Even now, thinking you have it all figured out. We informed Art of our location when we headed here. Right now he's gathering the rest of the team, crafting a cover story for our absence. They'll have to make the pitch without us, but the extra effort with their purchasing managers should pay off." "Do I really want to hear this?" he wondered. "Oh, what the heck, why not?" "Extra effort?" Tom prodded. "You always were a go-getter, Tanya." It was so easy. I hate to even call it effort, she laughed. What's the old joke? The worst closeness I ever had was great? At the bidders conference, it was straightforward with the men. We had to get a bit more creative with Brenda, the token woman on the selection board. It's funny, I can even seduce a woman, but I did throw in old Pete over there as the kicker. She was situationally bi-curious. As I recall, her situation cleared up about the same time my tongue began lapping at her. With promises of more to come when we started working together after the contract award, yeah, we have the selection board covered. Why all this then? I mean, if it's all set up, why the strong-arm tactics? Tom asked. That was Pete's idea, the idiot. I told him to cool off, that I would come home and please you and be back in time to catch the flight, but he had to go all alpha. Look what that got us. So now, instead of being the face of the winning team, I'm back to dealing with Art. Like I said, fixable, but it will set me back. You wouldn't have bought me so cheap, he said. Maybe not, Tanya replied, but I still would have made the flight. Well, you sure as hell ain't making that flight now, he declared. Remembering how Pete seemed so clued in, he figured Tanya must have a transmitter. Art, are you listening? I'm about to call the cops. I'm sure there's a handful of felonies involved here, and we haven't even begun to go down the rabbit trail of fraud. That's a federal contract, isn't it, Tanya? Tom asked rhetorically. Yeah, the feds take a dim view of how, did you phrase it, extra effort? I'm sure you have great lawyers and all, Art, but maybe there's an alternative? He let it hang. A moment later, Tanya's cell phone ringtone played, Hail to the Chief. Art? She asked into the phone. Of course. I'll put you on speaker. Tom? Art's voice came through the speaker. First, let me apologize to you. Pete's actions were a gross lapse of judgment. I can assure you the board will deal with him assertively. Thank you, Art. That eases my mind. Glad to see that you and the board take assault and fraud seriously. Tom, these are all unfortunate allegations. Lawyers will profit, but nobody wants to rock the boat. We might pay a fine, Pete and Bill get community service, but ultimately, you'll be divorced and half as wealthy, Art explained in a businesslike manner. Do I detect an OR in this story, Art? Tom inquired. Tanya always said you were the cleverer of the two. Still, I'm happier to have hired Tanya. Yes, Tom, there most decidedly is an OR, Art continued. Tom, we, Kramerica, have displaced you in your wife's affections, and when you found out and questioned it, you were treated most shabbily. Most shabby. Shocking, Tom chimed in. Tom, Art continued, instead of calling the cops, as you put it, suppose we could come to an agreement. I just sent a snap to Tanya's phone, not me, one of my tech boys here. They tell me they disappear after viewing. Have a peek. Perhaps that might restore some goodwill. Tanya opened the snap and turned the phone to Tom. He saw the words, Bank of Grand Cayman, and a number. A very large number. And when would that be deposited? Tom asked. It's already there, Tom. You have an email with the account number. This has been a very bad day for you, Tom. This may be a hard decision for you to make, and I don't discount the emotion. Tanya is a very desirable woman. Be that as it may, however, one can't take emotion to the bank, can one? One can't, Tom agreed, affecting Art's upper-crust clipped manner of speech. Kramerica will cover the costs of your divorce. You can never reconcile. I think we all recognize that. Tanya will file. She will ask for her personal belongings and her retirement. He thought for a moment before replying. On the one hand, he could stand on principle and expose the whole sordid mess and let the chips fall. On the other hand, he could just walk away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to do just that. Does Kramerica have a medical staff, Art? Tom asked. Yes, Tom. I believe we have some physicians on retainer, Art replied. Good, Tom said. You better load a few into a limo and send them over here to pick up your team. Are we in agreement then? Art asked. Tanya who? Tom replied. Precisely, Art agreed. Are we done, Tom? Art asked. Goodbye, Art, Tom said and ended the call. Tom put his phone away, turned off the recording app, and slipped it back into his pocket. I knew you would see it our way, Tom. We can still be friends, friends with benefits when this is all over. She summoned up what she thought was her most winning smile, but even her incandescent smile couldn't reverse the effects of her ruined nose. Her eyes were turning black, and the blood was crusted under her nose, dried drips down to her chin. Tom found the sight comical and allowed himself a smile. Once again, Tanya misread his smile for agreement and leaned in to kiss him. Tom extended his right hand to halt Tanya, using it to gently push her back until she landed on the couch with a thud. Expressing disdain, he questioned the notion of wanting to kiss her, leaving Tanya hurt and looking up at him. Declaring his decision, Tom insisted that she remove whatever she wanted by the next day. Walking toward the door, he stopped beside Bill, inquiring about his injured foot. Dismissive of Bill's complaints, Tom kicked him in the groin, causing Bill to curl up and moan. Approaching Pete, who had managed to sit up, Tom assured him he wouldn't physically damage him. Pete, relieved, smiled, but it quickly vanished when Tom's foot applied pressure to Pete's groin. Rolling onto his side in pain, Pete watched as Tom exited the room. He got into his car, unsure where he was going, but food and shelter were high on the hierarchy of needs scale for a good reason. He grabbed a burger from a takeout place, checked into a Red Roof Inn just outside of town near the freeway, and fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Despite enduring numerous physical strains from various injuries, he rose early the following morning and reluctantly got out of bed. While preparing motel room coffee, his phone chimed, and he eagerly grabbed it. The text message came from the number, and he opened it promptly. "Sorry for yesterday. I can meet. TGIF at the mall, noonish. I'll wave you over to seats at the bar." "I'll be there," he replied, and poured the lukewarm brown water from the coffee maker carafe into the paper cup. With determination, he set up his laptop, gearing up for some online banking. Reflecting on his college days, a time predating his relationship with Tanya, Tom recalled his economics professor's advice to maintain an offshore account for unforeseen circumstances. With his professor's assistance, he established a bank account in the Cayman Islands, which he fondly referred to as his go-to-hell fund. Over the past decade, he diligently contributed to it, and now he boasted an impressive sum of close to $50,000. Tom felt a sense of pride knowing that his go-to-hell fund was about to receive a significant boost. Tom accessed the secure website for each bank. With his passcode and several keystrokes, he transferred the bulk of Comerica's payment into his personal account, leaving $100,000 in the original account. After a shower, a change, and getting ready, he headed out to meet the mystery texter. Tom entered TGIF just past noon. As he entered, he noticed a man waving him over. The man appeared to be about Tom's age, well-dressed and handsome. Tom approached him. "I believe you sent me a text," Tom said as he sat down. "I'm sorry for how it turned out. I don't know if there was any clean way to tell you," the stranger began. "Why don't you start with who you are and your connection to Tanya?" Tom replied. "I was on the team. I left the Army after 8 years, wounded in action, and had a lengthy recovery before being medically discharged. I joined Comerica about 6 months ago and was assigned to Pete's team around 3 months ago. While talking to a friend about the job, I mentioned working for Tanya. When he asked for her full name, we realized we had a mutual friend, and he asked me to watch out for Tanya as a favor. At first, everything was great. I was warmly welcomed to the team. It didn't take long to find out why," he started. "About 2 months in, Tanya approached me. She is extremely attractive and, compelling. But when I asked her about her ring, she just smiled and told me you were okay with it. I wasn't and said so. That started the deep freeze. After I turned her down, I got all the undesirable assignments and nothing but grief from Pete. I called our mutual friend back and told him about Tanya approaching me. He told me about you and thought that pimping your wife for pay seemed out of character for the man he knew. He believed there was more to it than Tanya let on, and that you needed to know. Pete sent me the pic when they were trying to get me on board with the team, kind of a prize I could expect if I went along. Let's just say I don't agree with their methods. I resigned yesterday and sent you the text." "Our friend?" Tom asked. "Troy Baker. If I hadn't met Troy," he replied, then paused a moment before continuing. "Let's just say he helped me out of a scrape when I was a green LT. I owe him a favor or two." "Don't we both?" Tom agreed. "What are you going to do?" the stranger asked. "Art pretty much laid it all out for me. I could get the cops involved, and yes, Bill, Pete, and even Tanya would face legal problems. But with his lawyers, it would all end up as a bump in the road. We made a deal. You might think I'm selling out, and maybe you're right in a way. But they stole the only thing I had that was irreplaceable. If I can't make them pay legally, well, at least I can make them pay. It won't bring Tanya back, but I think I may find she's less irreplaceable than I thought. I have a trip planned. Tell Troy thanks for everything. I won't be going back to work. What about you? Tom asked finally. Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Inc. Now that you're gone, they might just need another engineer. I think you'll find they do business a bit differently at Baxter. Maybe more to your liking. Challenging, but the fringe benefits won't compare to what Tanya's team was offering, Tom smiled. Expressing his acceptance of the arrangement, the stranger stood up, prompting Tom to do the same. With a simple nod to each other, they left without exchanging any further words. Fast forward to Monday, Tom had just completed the check-in process for his flight to Costa Rica. As he contemplated the upcoming relaxation in Tamarindo, he headed towards security. Spotting a mailbox, he pulled out an envelope from his pocket addressed to the DOJ in Washington, D.C. Containing a thumb drive with the recording, he thought it might pique their interest. Considering the possibility that Art's legal team might not be as formidable as assumed, Tom dropped the envelope into the box before proceeding into the security line. Update. 9 months later, seated at his usual table in the cafe, Tom received mail from Anna, who brought him his cerveza. "Thank you, dear," he said, raising the bottle to his lips. Holding the envelope, he wondered who had found him. Not going to great lengths to stay hidden, finding him in a little town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica would have required resources beyond the ordinary guy's reach. His first thought was that Art's people had found him. Letting the envelope sit at his house for 2 days, he was fairly certain it wasn't a bomb, yet you can't be too careful. "Carlos," Tom called out to the cafe owner. "Tienes tus cuchillo?" "Sí, Señor Tom." Tom handed over the envelope and stepped back a few paces. Can never be too careful, he thought as Carlos cut open the envelope. He handed it to Tom, who thanked him, took another pull from his beer bottle, and turned the envelope over. Several sheets of paper fell onto the table, picking up a note that said, "Thought you would find this interesting," along with a phone number. The number, Tom thought. Troy would have the resources to find him. I can live with that. Flipping the other piece of paper over, he found a copy of a newspaper article with a picture. The photo depicted Pete, Bill, Tanya, and Betty being led out of the Cromerica building in handcuffs. The headline for the article read, "4 indicted in multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." He smiled. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't everything he thought they were, he said to himself, a habit he picked up since his Spanish was weak and English wasn't widely spoken. He liked to hear English conversation even if it was just him talking to himself. "Ana, otra cerveza, por favor," he said, holding up his empty bottle. "Sí, Mr. Tom." "Gracias, Ana," he said as he accepted his beer, took a swallow, and looked out at the deep blue Pacific. "Tanya who?"
When my wife and I arrived at the Halloween party, it was already lively. It was hard not to notice her fit physique showcased by her tight, jet-black Catwoman outfit. Despite being a mom of 2, Alicia looks stunning. Sometimes I forget just how attractive she is. I, on the other hand, was dressed as a pirate. Hot? Not really. But not too shabby either. Alicia gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before mingling with other guests, while I made my way to the drinks area where my friends were engaged in a heated debate. As I approached, I realized they were arguing over the age-old question, Hulk or Superman? It struck me as a bit silly considering the intellect in the room. Superman was obviously the superior choice. Nevertheless, I decided to join the debate, drawing from my childhood spent immersed in Marvel and DC comics. Confident in my expertise, I hoped to settle the matter once and for all. However, my arguments only fueled the debate further, turning the conversation into chaos. But that's what happens when you mix beer with grown men. Eventually, we all agreed to table the discussion, opting instead to enjoy the abundance of beer and fun. Knowing Alicia wouldn't want to leave anytime soon, I planned to stay relatively sober. She was already having a great time chatting with her best friend Susie, who was also dressed as Catwoman. Alicia and Susie had been inseparable since middle school, despite being almost polar opposites in personality. They shared the same upbringing, often jokingly speculating about being switched at birth. However, they both detested that joke. Susie was married to Dominic, who was quite different from me in many ways. While I managed restaurants for a living, Dominic worked with his hands. Though I wasn't as active in the gym as I used to be, I still maintained a decent level of fitness from my boxing days in college. Dominic, however, works at a nearby factory. While I'm unsure of his specific role, I know it entails heavy lifting for 8 to 10 hours daily. He's practically a gym rat, resulting in a muscular physique. Unlike my neat short hair, his is long and tied back in a ponytail, complemented by a beard giving him an Aztec warrior vibe. If Dominic resembles Drogo from Game of Thrones, I'm more akin to Don Draper from Mad Men. Though I never truly warmed up to him, I didn't dislike him either. Our connection was merely through Susie, my wife's best friend, so our interactions were sporadic and never extended beyond that. And tonight was no exception. Sporting a Tarzan costume in chilly weather struck me as insensitive. I couldn't help but perceive it as an idiot move, reflecting his tendency for such actions. Despite his flirtatious behavior, which often bordered on inappropriate, the women, including Alicia, seemed to find it more amusing than offensive. This bothered me, especially considering Susie's apparent indifference. While she occasionally playfully chided him, there was no real reprimand, suggesting she took pride in his ability to attract attention. As the night progressed and Dominic's inhibitions lowered with drinks consumption, his flirtatiousness became more pronounced, regardless of the women's marital status. Though some husbands may have been angered by his advances, no one reacted, perhaps out of fear, intoxication, or a desire to avoid confrontation. However, I remained vigilant, ready to intervene if he crossed a line with Alicia. Sensing my unease, she approached me. "Are you enjoying yourself, Greg?" she shouted over the music. I nodded and took a sip of beer, observing her move to the music. Standing beside me, her attention shifted to Tarzan, silently appraising his physique. Unintentionally, I felt a surge of jealousy as I sensed her desire. It bothered me. "Who dresses as Tarzan in this weather?" Alicia snapped back to reality and faced me. "You know Dominic, sweetheart, always craving the spotlight." I chuckled, but the taste of my beer suddenly soured. Alicia noticed my shift in mood. "Are you jealous?" she asked. "Jealous of him? I don't need to strip down to get attention," I replied, my tone defensive. Alicia laughed it off. "Of course not, honey," she said, turning her attention back to him. As the night progressed and more drinks flowed, inhibitions waned. Dominic and his loincloth became less of a focus as I mingled with my genuine friends. It wasn't until later that I noticed Dominic making advances towards Alicia. Searching for her, I found them in the kitchen, engaged in a carnal conversation. My jealousy flared, and Dominic retreated upon seeing me. Alicia, sensing the tension, greeted me with forced warmth. "Hi, darling, I was just looking for you," she hurriedly said. "In the same place all night, Alicia. What were you two talking about?" "You looked awfully cozy," I asked, my tone accusatory. She tried to dismiss it. "Nothing happened, Greg. Dominic was just being his usual flirty self," she assured, but my unease lingered. "I'm just a bit tipsy, honey. Don't worry," she said, patting my cheek before leaving. For the rest of the evening, Dominic and Alicia kept their distance, exchanging only secretive glances. It was enough to unsettle me. I needed a break. The beer was kicking in, so I needed a bathroom break. Afterward, I bumped into Dominic as if he'd trailed me. "Got a problem, Greg?" he slurred, his gaze menacing. "What?" I felt the surrealness of the moment. He accused me of looking down on him due to my wealth, inciting superiority. It puzzled me. "You're drunk, Dominic. Go home before you say something you'll regret," I said, moving past him. "Regret what? Like sleeping with your pretty wife?" he jabbed, grabbing my attention. I confronted him, warning him to keep my wife out of his twisted thoughts. He smirked, dismissing them as memories, not fantasies. His words struck me like thunder, ending the conversation. "You're full of it," I retorted, less certain now. Then he made crude remarks about Alicia, crossing a line. Enraged, I struck him, the impact echoing through the drywall. Descending the stairs, I found Alicia, her tear-filled eyes confirming Dominic's claims. Panic ensued as Dominic lay unconscious. Amid the chaos, Alicia approached me, her question frozen on her lips. A glance told her I knew. Her teary eyes confirmed Dominic's words. "Call emergency! Dominic's unconscious!" she cried. Screams echoed from above, but I stood there, looking at Alicia, searching for the woman I married. Honestly, I didn't care about Dominic's fate at that moment. "What the hell did you do to my husband?" A scream pierced the air behind me, followed by fists punching my back. I dodged Susie's swings and someone pulled her away. "Greg!" "What the hell?" Richard, the party host, questioned, noticing the chaos. Ignoring him, I faced Susie. "Did you know your husband slept with Alicia?" Her silence spoke volumes, confirming her knowledge without anger or denial. She just looked at me as if she knew everything. Alicia's hand rested gently on my shoulder. "Greg, we need to talk, but not here," she said softly. I turned to her, unleashing a surge of rage unlike any I'd felt before. It was so intense, tears welled in my eyes, a release of emotion preventing me from exploding. "He woke up!" a shout echoed from above. Susie hurried back upstairs. My anger began to fade as the gravity of the situation sank in. What if I had eliminated Dominic in a moment of anger? I could face lifelong consequences, even assault charges, jeopardizing my hard-earned career over a drunken mistake. The same drunken mistake who slept with my wife. "Greg, come on, honey. Let's get out of here. We need to talk," Alicia pleaded. "Us? No, Alicia. You're going home with your boyfriend and his wife. I'm leaving," I retorted, heading for the front door. Alicia grabbed me in desperation. "Greg, you can't leave me here. We're going home and we're going to talk. Do you hear me? You're not leaving me behind," she cried, her face streaked with tears, a mix of fury and sadness. It made no sense what she was angry about. "I can't handle this, Alicia. Don't go home. I could end up in jail for assault. I don't want to add domestic violence to the mix." "Damn you, Greg. Damn you. Want to punch me? Go ahead, coward. At least you'll acknowledge me. Damn. It'd be the first time you've touched me in weeks." She jabbed her finger into my chest as her anger escalated, leaving me puzzled by its intensity. She was the one in the wrong, yet she was furious. "Is that it? Because I don't cuddle you every night? Is that your lame excuse? Is that why you cheated with this idiot?" She didn't respond verbally. Her defiant glare spoke volumes. "Just so you know, Alicia, I earn a living. I don't have a husband to pay my bills. Maybe if you had a job, you'd understand what it's like to come home exhausted." Suddenly, I remembered our audience, hanging on every word like they were watching a movie. Alicia was mocking me. "Poor Greg, too tired for his wife, yet finds time for adult movies. Maybe if you paid attention to your wife instead of silicone Barbie dolls online, she wouldn't confide in her friend about feeling neglected." Alicia's voice crescendoed, fists clenched, tears streaming down her face, a mix of pain and fury. It was the ultimate humiliation. I had no witty retort or comeback. Speechless, I faced the judgmental stares of our friends and neighbors, shock, disgust, sympathy, and perhaps a hint of entertainment. I had to leave. Alicia's cries of despair echoed until I started the car and drove off into the night. This story, based on real events, is not from Greg's perspective, but mine, Richard, the party host. Yes, I have a hole the size of Dominic's next to my daughter's room. Writing from Greg's viewpoint allowed readers to feel his anger and humiliation. My wife and I discussed it extensively. It's like watching a train wreck. You can't look away. Susie's lack of anger when Greg disclosed Alicia's affair with Dominic indicated she was already aware. Was it a ménage à trois or another scenario? Frankly, a ménage à trois involving them would rival any adult movie. How long had this been going on? I also noticed the exchanged looks between Alicia and Dominic at the party, suggesting something more. Maybe I'm overanalyzing, but maybe not. It was evident Greg was neglecting Alicia carnally, perhaps in other aspects too. Was this an excuse for her infidelity? I doubt it. Does it explain why she cheated? Certainly. Women whose advances are consistently rebuffed may be more tempted to have an affair, especially if the husband shows interest in other women or watches adult movies, which can be seen as a form of betrayal. By the way, Alicia is incredibly attractive in real life. In my opinion, any man would find her irresistible. But this reinforces the saying that for every beautiful woman, there's a man tired of having lovemaking with her. The crucial question is, what happens next? Currently, the four of them are keeping silent about the situation, but it's only a matter of time before it comes out. While this story is based on true events, I didn't witness everything and had to take creative liberties, especially with Greg's inner thoughts. I sympathize with him and the tough choices he faces. Alicia treated him unfairly, regardless of her reasons. I'm uncertain whether reconciliation or divorce is the best path. Full disclosure, I'm somewhat biased, as Greg is a friend of mine. And about Superman and the Hulk, I side with Greg. Superman's powers like thermal vision, flight, and super speed would easily defeat the Hulk, unless there's kryptonite involved. But that's beside the point. "Mr. Kirkson, they're calling you on line 1. "Who is it, Betty? Mr. Ford is calling for you, sir." Greg called me. I've been trying to reach him since the Halloween party incident. Until now, he, his wife, and their lovers remained silent. But there have been so many questions. How could something like this not happen? The public showdown was so dramatic, with elements of lovemaking, violence, and betrayal, and the epic confrontation between David and Goliath, except this time, Goliath had a glass jaw and wrote a check his drunk self couldn't cash. And David cashed it out of genuine hatred. Patch him through, Betty. Sir, he seems a bit upset. Well, yes, his wife did publicly humiliate him. If he weren't upset, I'd be concerned. Thank you, Betty. I'll handle it. I awaited the click indicating I was connected to Greg. Hey, Greg, it's Richard. I've been trying to reach you since I couldn't bring myself to say these words out loud. Ever since I found out about my wife sleeping with that moron. Yeah, I needed some time to process everything, Greg replied, his voice still carrying the simmering anger beneath his composed tone. Even over the phone, his emotions were palpable. So, do you want to talk about it? I asked, hearing a chuckle from him on the other end, tinged with bitterness. It almost sounded like a snort. Why would I want to talk to you, Richard? Huh, buddy? So you can broadcast it online? Does your little story need a sequel? Are people dying to know what happened next to the guy who couldn't satisfy his wife? Can't your eager fans just wait to see how my damn life unfolds? Fine. He had read my narrative. Now, not only was he furious at his cheating wife, her deceitful friend, and her caveman lover, but he was also angry with me. Fantastic. Greg and I were high school buddies. He played baseball, I played football. Despite losing touch after school, him off to college, me joining the Air Force, we reconnected when I returned to our hometown years later. He'd landed a management job at Olive Garden. I teased him about wasting his college degree, but he persisted and quickly climbed the ranks, eventually becoming a district manager overseeing multiple restaurants, earning almost as much as me. Now, my dear friend was seething at me. Not good, Greg. Usually I'd crack a joke to diffuse tension, but in this case, it'd only make things worse. I especially liked the ending, I began, but he cut me off. I had no choice but to shut up and listen. You know, where I tucked my tail between my legs and ran off like a coward. Nice touch. His words dripped with sarcasm, leaving me feeling like a terrible friend, utterly defenseless. Greg, where are you? We need to talk, I urged. You know what's funny, Richard? I've suddenly become quite the popular guy these days, more so than ever before. Seems like everyone wants a chat with me. Must be my charming personality, he quipped, his voice slurring slightly. I could hear the clinks of liquid pouring into a glass. Greg, are you drunk? I asked, concerned. No, Richard, I was drunk an hour ago. Can't tell you who I am now, he retorted sarcastically. All right, I admit it, I was a lousy friend, but I'm here to make it right. Where are you, Greg? I said, hastily grabbing my coat and keys, momentarily forgetting my work obligations. Screw you, Richard. Not telling you where I am. Don't you dare show up at this bar. I'll mess you up if you do, he warned before the line went dead. But I didn't need him to tell me. I knew exactly where he was. There were only a handful of bars in town worth going to, and Greg had his favorite at Moe's, partly because he had a thing for the cute bartender there. She was the type who could flirt and seem unattainable at the same time, which only added to her allure. Yet, despite her charm, she wasn't busy when I walked in. My heart sank seeing Greg alone at the bar, the sole patron in the place. Checking my watch, I realized it was just past noon. Karen, the bartender, greeted me with a wave, her eyes showing concern. Does this handsome guy belong to you? She teased, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I nodded subtly, gesturing for her to give us some privacy with a tilt of my head towards Greg. It was all I managed before his fist connected with my face, sending me reeling and seeing stars. No wonder Dominic ended up in bad shape. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, wiping blood from my lip as Greg glared down at me. Eventually, he shook his head and returned to the bar stool. I picked myself up, signaling to Karen to keep quiet as I made my way over to Greg before he noticed me again. She stood before us, eyes wide as saucers. As she started to approach, I silently waved and nodded, signaling that it was all right. In response, she nodded back and resumed clearing tables. Now that that's settled, can we talk? I asked, mustering up courage as I sat down beside him. He took another sip of his beer and shook his head. Off the record? He quipped sarcastically. I chuckled inwardly. At least his sense of humor was intact. Anyway, you really hit a nerve there, he said with disdain. How's your relationship with your mom? You've met her, right? Yeah. I still remember her frisking me to make sure I didn't bring any forbidden stuff into her house. We laughed about it later, Greg recounted, taking another sip before meeting my gaze. For God's sake, Richard. It was bad enough going through that, then reading about it and knowing all my friends knew it was me. Greg, I just penned it down. I never meant to embarrass you. And besides, no one will even know it's you. I tried to reassure both him and myself. 2 cats, Tarzan, and a pirate. Plus the pirate who tossed Tarzan into the wall. How many damn Halloween parties do you think that's happened at? Most of them are the same. Greg looked like he wanted to punch me again. You find this funny? Okay, humor was definitely not the way to go. You're right, Greg. I was an idiot. I genuinely apologize for putting you in that spot. Well, I'm not sorry for punching you, he retorted. I rubbed my chin and chuckled. You still punch like a girl. No wonder you always got your backside kicked in boxing. That seemed to break the tension, and it continued to thaw. I managed to coax him away from Moe's and into my car. Karen shot me a grateful look and hugged me as we left. Take care of him, Richard. He's going through a lot, she said. My jaw was throbbing and beginning to swell, but I got Greg out of there, and that was what mattered most. The moment I secured him into my passenger seat, he drifted off, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Instead of heading to his mom's, I drove him to my place. Along the way, I called another friend, John. How's it going, Richie Rich? He greeted me cheerfully as he answered the phone. John was one of those guys who still acted like he was in his 20s. A great guy, though quite immature. I emphasize very, since most guys are at least a little immature. He's the one who sparked the whole Hulk versus Superman debate, always the life of the party. However, none of the wives really want their husbands to be under his influence. He had a knack for bringing out the teenage troublemaker in his friends. But we all love him. John, I need your hand. I found Greg at Moe's. Might need some help getting him into my place and settled in bed. He's out cold. Damn. Glad you tracked him down. Been looking for him all week. After what that idiot did to him, it's a miracle he didn't do something drastic. John parked his Mustang behind my Tahoe in my driveway, and together we tackled the task of moving 200 pounds of dead weight onto the couch in my basement. Not an easy feat. After chatting for a bit, he headed out with the promise that I'd keep him updated. Being home early meant I had the house all to myself, which was a rarity. So rare, in fact, that I found myself at a loss for what to do. Didn't want to step out in case Greg woke up disoriented, so I fired up the George Foreman grill for steak and baked some potatoes. Then I flipped through my cable sports package, hoping to catch a good game or at least some interesting sports talk. Settled on a documentary and dug into my meal. It wasn't long before my wife, Nikki, walked in with our kids in tow. Hey, what brings you home so early? She asked, planting a kiss on my cheek. The kids scampered upstairs. Found Greg at Moe's, sloshed as hell. Brought him back here and laid him out in the basement, I explained. She looked hesitant. Are you sure that's a good idea? I don't want any drunken antics in front of the kids. He'll be fine, sweetheart. I'll keep an eye on him, I assured her, feeling her hand caress my cheek, sending a shiver down my spine. That's when she noticed the swelling. Richard, what the hell? Did he do this? I'm all right, honey. Don't worry about it. Rich, get him out of here. Honey, everything's under control. The poor guy just found out his wife was cheating on him a few weeks back, and it happened so publicly. He's on edge. Plus, he's been dealing with it all alone. I'm his friend. He needed an outlet for his pent-up anger, and if that meant taking some hits, I didn't mind. Besides, my jaw's not as fragile as Tarzan's. Maybe he should consider a different costume next year. Nikki couldn't help but chuckle at that. Watching Tarzan get his backside kicked by a pirate was pretty amusing. I doubt Jane would approve. Yeah, Tarzan definitely got what was coming to him. Dominic should spend less time pumping iron and more time hitting the bag, Nikki quipped. Or at least learn to dodge, she added. We shared a laugh once her giggles subsided. One thing I've always admired about Nikki is her personality and sense of humor. It's one of the reasons why I can't stay angry with her for too long. I headed downstairs to check on Greg. His thunderous snoring assured me he was still very much alive, albeit functionally comatose. I slipped a pillow under his head when he let out a sound that could wake the dead. His drink's breath could have knocked out a bull. What the heck, Greg? I muttered, the stench clinging to me. I needed to step away. A few hours later, a zombie-like version of my friend emerged from the abyss. His bloodshot eyes screamed exhaustion and distress as he shuffled around my kitchen. Nikki shot me a silent warning that spoke volumes. Keep him in line or he's out. I approached him in the kitchen. How you feeling, buddy? Feels like my wife cheated on me, humiliated me in front of the whole neighborhood, then ran me over with a truck. At least your memory's intact. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. His eyes narrowed. My memory's fine. I remember your damn story too. Remember how you socked me in the face for it? I rubbed my tender jaw. That part seems fuzzy. Might need a repeat just to be sure it's done. There was no real venom in his words. Despite his talk of wanting to punch me again, I knew he wouldn't. I've said it before, but I'm really sorry about that story, Greg. I didn't think it would reach as many people as it did, and I certainly didn't think you'd find out about it. I was wrong. People actually read it. I even got a message from this guy I know who heard about the party from someone, and then read your story online. Who's this guy? You don't know him. He's this loudmouth named Harry from Virginia. I chuckled. Harry Inva, huh? Heard of him? Nice guy once you get past his attitude. By the way, he's on my side and thinks you're an idiot too, Greg said, grinning. Yeah, well, I'm sure he felt that way before reading the story I wrote about you, I replied. Greg nodded and chuckled. I gave him a friendly pat on the back, which he didn't seem to mind, confirming we were okay. Richard, why'd you have to paint me as a wimp? Did I really just bolt like that? Wimp? Greg, you took the guy down in one punch. I was half expecting you to bite his ear off. If you boxed like that in college, you'd have been a champ. No one sees you as weak. Screw you. It's a skill I've still got. Idiot. He smirked and shook his head. I really handed him his rear, didn't I? Pride and laughter blended in his voice. Hell yeah. Bet your sweet rear you couldn't pull that off, he teased, nudging me. Nah. Might take me 2 hits, I quipped back, unable to stifle a chuckle. It was good to see Greg. So, what went down after I split? Kept looking over my shoulder, thinking I was headed to the slammer. Well, Greg, after you bailed from the Halloween party, Alicia let out this wail like she was facing a firing squad and crumpled to the floor. She sobbed loudly like a broken Catwoman. Nikki rushed to her aid, helping her up and leading her to the couch. Susie, the other Catwoman, came down the stairs with her disgraced Tarzan, holding his head as she guided him. Alicia caught sight of them and flew into a rage. You idiot! What did you tell Greg? You've ruined my life, you idiot! Tarzan, already battered by the pirate, now dodged Catwoman's claws, while Catwoman #2 tried to intervene. Alicia, stop it! Cut it out! Susie yelled, defending her husband. Tarzan, being saved by a woman from a woman, only stoked his fire. Can this idiot embarrass the Jungle Man any further? You should have said something, right? You idiot. Couldn't take no for an answer. What's wrong with you? The Jungle Man regarded Alicia's fury with detachment. It was clear he hadn't grasped everything yet. The knockout must have sobered him up. He knew he'd caused today's pain. Alicia, I'm sorry. I was drunk, he said. She stopped attacking and collapsed to the floor again. What do I do now, Susie? What do I do now? Back to Richard's kitchen. After that, they had to haul Dominic to the ER. Turns out he had a concussion. He wanted to press charges, but Susie and Alicia talked him out of it. Alicia pleaded with him not to. She knew if you got arrested, there'd be little hope of your return. Greg chuckled and shook his head. In any case, there's little hope left for this, I sighed, nodding sadly. So, Greg, what happened after you split? All we heard was the rubber hitting the road and the roar of your engine. I wanted to chase after you, but my Tahoe was packed with other cars. I feared you might crash. You haven't responded to any of our calls. Yeah, well, I needed to get away and think, you know? I couldn't wrap my head around it. All our friends are looking at me, judging me. I needed space. So you headed to your mom's place. It must have been tough going back there. Yeah, well, life throws you curveballs sometimes. The only way to deal with it is to do something out of the ordinary. Greg, October 31st, party crap. Damn it. Damn it, these damn women. I sped recklessly along side streets leading out of town. Honestly, I had no clue where I was going. Stop signs, speed limits, traffic lights, none of it mattered. I drove like I was the only one on the road that mattered. What's that sound? I glanced at the passenger seat, recognizing Alicia's ringtone. Her lovely face illuminated my Android screen. She smiled at me, a loving smile captured in time. I remember taking this photo. I was so happy. So full of love and adoration. Damn lie. I fought the urge to chuck my phone out the window. Her picture on the screen lied to me. If I answered, the voice on the other end would lie to me. The cheerful melody announcing her call was a lie. Lies. She slept with Dominic. Maybe they even kissed. Passionately. Excitedly. Damn it. I bet the idiot loved it. Another man's wife in his bed? Who did he think he was? I was the one by her side when she was sick. In the delivery room with her twice. Promising to love her in sickness and health. I devoted my life to her. The persistent ringtone tormented me with its falsehoods. He paused for a moment, then continued. I shut it off and pulled out the battery. Silence. No more lies. I drove aimlessly around the city, my mind on autopilot, protecting itself from overload. The images of tonight's events and worse, the scenarios I imagined between my wife and that idiot in the jungle, were overwhelming my mind, overclocking my processor. Reality hit me when I gazed up and found myself parked in front of my parents' garage. I couldn't recall driving here. It seemed my subconscious guided me back to my childhood abode. Cutting the engine, I entered. Every child holds a key to their parents' home, even if they vowed never to return. Well, perhaps not every child, but in my case, it was late. The living room, unchanged for decades, greeted me in darkness. The sofa, coffee table, lamp, all fixtures frozen in time exactly as I remembered them. Strangely, I found solace in this familiarity. That night, in one drunken conversation with a Neanderthal, everything changed in an instant. I've always been skeptical of stories where worlds shift in a blink, except in tragedy. This night turned me into a believer. My entire understanding of life was upended by a single conversation. Returning to my childhood home brought a sense of stability after an earthquake shatters buildings and fractures the ground. In such times, people crave calmness. Stability was what I needed now. For the moment, I was safe at home. "Who's there?" My mom's voice rang out, envisioning her wielding a baseball bat, ready to fend off intruders. "It's me, Ma." "Gregory?" "Yes." Suddenly, the light flicked on, momentarily blinding me. I squinted to shield my eyes. "Why on earth are you skulking around in the dark? Trying to give me a heart attack?" "Glad to see you too, Mom." As my eyes adjusted, I faced an elderly lady, clad in floral pajamas, hair in curlers. "Why are you here at this hour? And what's with the idiotic outfit?" Straight to the point. "That's my mother." In that moment, I realized I was still in most of my pirate costume. My hat, parrot, and eye patch were long gone. Now, I just looked, well, like an idiot. "Long story, Ma. Listen, I'll be staying here for a while. The kids will leave tomorrow, but I'll be back. I'll fill you in, but not in front of them." Okay. I didn't ask her to stay with her. I simply informed her of my intentions. This might appear odd to most, but it's normal for us. My family isn't what you'd call affectionate. My dad is straightforward, never saying more than necessary and expecting the same in return. Hugs are brief, "I love you," reserved for dire moments. My parents were a perfect match, both reserved in affection. How they even conceived me remains a puzzling mystery. They were either destined to find each other or destined to suffer alone. "All right, Gregory, you know where everything is. I'm going back to bed." My mom's frail figure vanished around the corner, her voice trailing. "And lock up." The next morning, I checked my phone, finding 29 missed calls. 15 from Alicia, some from Richard, and a few from others at the party. I ignored them, knowing they'd likely consist of people eager for gossip about the affair. After a restless night, pain, anger, and confusion lingered. I also wondered about the police. What happened to Dominic after I left? Did he go to the hospital, press charges? Would I end up in jail? I slipped out of the house before my mom woke, leaving a note explaining my departure. If Alicia called, Mom was instructed to inform her I'd reach out when ready. I parked near my favorite bar, seeking solace in strong drink to numb the pain. For the next couple of weeks, I hid at my mom's, only encountering Alicia when dropping off the kids or fetching belongings. Our interactions were strained, ending with her upset. Before leaving, I overheard her talking on the phone, ears perking up as I listened. If it had been the creep, I would have lost it. But it was Susie, her half of the conversation leaving me unsure if it was better or worse. I divided my free time between my parents' place and the bar. With Dad away on business, it was just Mom and me. Oh, joy. Deep conversations weren't her thing, though she listened attentively and offered support, even if she didn't fully grasp the situation. I'd never discuss adult films with her, especially after her warnings in my younger years about blindness and hairy palms. During my stay, we spoke little. I outlined why I was staying, and she listened, but didn't press for details. When she asked what I'd do next, all I could do was shrug and admit I didn't know. "You'll figure it out," was her encouraging response. We didn't revisit the topic. Oddly comforting, it spared me from endless retelling and emotional coddling. I was free to grieve in my own way. Taking all my sick and personal days, I couldn't face anyone, even though no coworkers were at the party. Living in a small town, gossip spread like wildfire. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. It was public humiliation. Poor Greg, too busy with obscene films to satisfy his wife. Eventually, I had to shut off my phone. It kept ringing incessantly, faces pleading for answers. Screw them all! Whether the universe or Dominic's pride intervened, the cops never came. It was intriguing to observe my friends' behavior. They sent emails and even called, yet none visited my parents' house. I realized that when people are unsure what to say, they often avoid the situation altogether. They weren't neglectful friends, just unsure how to help. This silence, both a curse and a blessing, left me alone with my thoughts constantly. To quiet the disturbing images in my mind, I sought solace in drinks at the bar, with Karen becoming both my deity and my salvation. The hardest part about staying with my mother was being separated from my children. It was self-imposed exile, but it still stung. I knew seeing them meant facing Alicia, akin to reaching a warm bed across a half-frozen lake, so I drank even more to numb the pain. It took Karen showing me a story, Caught Cat Women, penned by a friend, to break the cycle. It mirrored my own script, featuring 2 cat women, a pirate, that damn Tarzan, Superman, and Hulk. The nerve. Fuming, I dialed 7 digits. Good morning, Mr. Kirkson's office. This is Betty. How can I help you today, Richard? Today, at Richard's place. So, what's the plan with Alicia? Divorce? Separation? Give her a thrashing? Greg chuckled sadly and stared at his plate. Do I have to choose? He quipped, lacking enthusiasm. I saw the agony etched on his face, replaying Halloween's events in his mind, her words echoing like a broken record. Greg, I've got to ask. You can tell me to buzz off if it's too personal, but about that adult film? What did she mean? Greg blushed, shifting uncomfortably. So what? I watch them occasionally, not every day. Are you implying she doesn't or you don't? He retorted defensively. Sure, I watch them, but Alicia said you were viewing them instead of being carnal with her. That's true. Buzz off, Richard. It's too personal. All right, buddy, fair enough. But I just want to understand what went wrong. You two seemed so happy. I never suspected a thing. He gazed down at his meal while his fork traced circles on the plate. She just doesn't get it, Rich. What's she not getting? Greg let his fork drop and ran his hands over his face, taking a deep breath. It was a sigh tinged with sadness, perhaps mixed with guilt. I work 10 to 12 hours every day, sometimes even 5 days a week if I'm lucky. When I get home, I'm exhausted. I'm stressed out. I deal with irate investors, clients, managers, carnal molestation claims, discrimination claims, and everything in between. It all falls on my shoulders. If something goes wrong at the restaurants, like some customer claiming to have spotted a rat and demanding free food, I'm the one who has to handle it. He paused, gathering himself to continue. I listened, waiting for him to spill it all out. Alicia requires a lot of foreplay. A lot. I have to spend 30 minutes just on foreplay. Then, when she's ready, we can start having physical engaging. She likes to change positions frequently. On top of that, she wants me to talk dirty to her throughout. I love my wife, I really do. And when I have the energy, it's fantastic. I know guys who complain that their wives are frigid, unimaginative, or just want to get it over with. Alicia is none of those. But I don't have the stamina to do this every night, especially after dealing with all the crap I face during the day. He paused, glancing away. Rich, sometimes I just feel better being alone. I hate to admit it. Every man dreams of a woman like Alicia. A passionate woman who genuinely enjoys lovemaking. I know I'm lucky to have her. But I noticed his eyes starting to cloud over. It's tough to reconcile the pain of marriage when you realize the part you played in your own troubles. I do so much for her, for the girls. I work my backside off to give them everything I didn't have as a kid. My dad was very thrifty. He only bought what I needed. I want more for my girls. And then there's my wife, and I enjoy spending time with them. They're my whole world. But sometimes, I just wish I didn't have to do something for someone else. When I come home after dealing with all the crap at work, sometimes I don't always want to be a dad or a husband or a boss. I think I missed a bit of that. How long has it been since you two were carnal? Before the party. He shook his head. I don't know, Rich. I really don't know. I didn't even realize so much time had passed. I nodded, a flicker of understanding dawning on me. Then I saw anger flash in his eyes. But that doesn't give her the right to do what she did. Though, Richard, I didn't humiliate her in front of everyone. I didn't cheat on her. She should have come to me with our issues. Why didn't she come to me? I had to take a risk with my next remark. It was crucial to convey my point to him without seeming like I was taking her side. Maybe for the same reason you never explained to her why you watch adult films. Communication can be tough, especially if you don't realize you need to say something in the first place. How do you communicate your unhappiness to your spouse? Simply put, you say, "I'm unhappy." Touché. Things were escalating too much. Usually at moments like this, I'd crack a joke, so I switched gears. "So, Greg, about my wall." He caught on that I was teasing him and grinned, shaking his head. "Call it even for this one." Idiot. I thought the punch in the face had evened things out. Not quite. I chuckled. Seeing Greg as he was before Halloween was refreshing, even if it was fleeting. Fair enough. That's when I noticed Nikki standing in the doorway with a peculiar expression. Her eyes urged me to see her right away. I left Greg to his meal and approached her. "What's wrong, dear?" She glanced around nervously and drew me closer to whisper. "Somehow Alicia found out Greg's here. She's on her way. Damn, John. Probably called her to vent or something stupid. Unknowingly gave away Greg's location. You need to intercept that woman at the door." Nikki. Nikki raised her hands and shook her head. "Rich, I'm not getting involved in this mess. Greg needs to face this. He's been avoiding her for 2 weeks." I felt frustration rising toward my wife. "She cheated on him. Haven't you forgotten that?" "No, I haven't. I've got a damn hole in the wall as a reminder." I glanced at Greg, who seemed oblivious to the impending showdown. "What do you want me to do, Nikki?" Her expression softened with resolve when she saw my determination to help my friend. "He has to handle this himself, babe. You can be there for him as a friend, help him through it, but he can't run from it." She patted my chest and left. I turned to prepare Greg for what was coming. "Greg, I heard your conversation. You can't exactly whisper. She's on her way." He rubbed his chin and winced. Then his expression shifted to determination. "Fine," he said, pushing away from the table. Turning to me, he met my gaze. "I'm ready to face this," he declared. With that, he rose and walked out of my back door. "Greg?" A beautiful sunset. Soft hues painted the pale sky, serene and almost calming. "Greg, honey?" The serenity shattered. I didn't respond to the alarmed voice signaling the arrival of my unfaithful wife. I didn't even turn to look at her. My eyes remained fixed on the sky above. Alicia interpreted my lack of reaction as an invitation, which in some sense she wasn't entirely wrong about. She settled beside me on Richard's back porch, drawing her knees to her chest as if seeking protection. "I've been searching everywhere for you, honey," she said, starting off in the worst possible way. "I've been in the same place all night," I muttered, deliberately echoing the exact words I'd used when I found her cozying up to Dominic in Richard's kitchen a couple of weeks ago. She seemed a bit puzzled by my response. "Greg, we need to talk," she said, and I nodded in agreement. From my side vision, I could sense her anguish. I avoided looking directly at her face, but it seemed like a grim sight. Swollen eyes, flushed cheeks, a somber expression. At least that's how her voice conveyed it. "I love you, honey." It's a lie. I cut her off. "Greg, stop it. Alicia, just stop it. You can't claim to love me and then embarrass me the way you did, airing our issues in public like that. I would never do that to you." "What are you talking about, Greg? You did this to me," she said, her voice rising with anger. "You stormed down the stairs like a madman in front of everyone. You asked Susie if she knew I was sleeping with her husband right in front of everyone's eyes. If you wanted to talk privately, you could have pulled me aside and yelled at me in the car. But no, you were the first one to air out my business like that." In a way, she had a point. I didn't see it that way at the time. I was blinded by rage. "Okay, Alicia, I'll give you that, but I didn't initiate this. Your damn boyfriend confronted me, telling me all about your indiscretions in front of other people. I handled it the best I could. I was furious, rightfully so. Could I have handled it differently?" I paused to rein in my emotions. "But I didn't cheat with anyone," I continued. "You didn't have someone come up to you and rub my betrayal in your face." I looked her squarely in the eyes. The anger drained from her expression, replaced by remorse and guilt. "I know, Greg," she said softly. I simply shook my head. "Do you really think so, Alicia? Do you really?" Her eyes sparked again. "Maybe you didn't physically betray me, Greg, but you weren't present for me. Remember last night when I wanted closeness? And you—" I shook my head. "It was on my birthday. I treated myself to some beautiful lingerie from Victoria's Secret. It was so hot. I indulged in a fragrant bubble bath, getting excited thinking about the night ahead. I lathered my body with eucalyptus-scented lotion, spent an hour doing my hair and makeup. Do you recall that night?" I did remember that night. That was the day I had to fire Frank. He was my close friend, one of my assistant managers back when I worked at Olive Garden. We'd become good friends over the years. When the allegations surfaced, I stood up for him vehemently. I was certain he wouldn't do something so reckless. But the girl had text messages. Damn text messages. When they emerged, I was livid. I was the one who promoted him. I was the one who vouched for him. And I was the one who had to deal with it. Or they'd deal with me. So, needless to say, I wasn't in the best mood that evening. But I didn't forget her birthday. I made a reservation at her favorite restaurant, all set for a nice dinner. But all Alicia wanted that night was dessert. We went out to dinner for your birthday, and then we made love that night. Alicia, I recalled this. She shook her head sadly. We had love-making, Greg. You couldn't even enjoy it. Then when I tried to cuddle with you, you pushed me away, saying you were tired. That's why I gave you space. Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard. I knew she wasn't finished yet, so I waited for her to continue. Then I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw you at your computer. I saw you watching adult films and pleasuring yourself. The words came out forcefully, and then she broke down. Her body trembled as she tried to cry silently, but to no avail. I sat beside her, speechless. Slowly, I began to grasp her perspective. Hearing her side of things opened my eyes. Until tonight, she was just a deceitful cheater. Now, I wasn't so sure who she really was. I get it, Alicia, all right? I took you for granted. But do you truly grasp this, Greg? Do you comprehend how deeply this devastated me? Can you fathom the pain of realizing that, at your best, you're not enough to satisfy your husband? I doubt you do. After that, I made a pact with myself to stop initiating lovemaking with you. I wanted you to desire me, but you never did. So, that's why you ended up with Dominic. Did he make you feel like a woman? She sniffled beside me and wiped her nose on her sleeve. Yes, Greg, he and Susie did. Damn it. Susie and I got drunk once in high school. Something happened that night. In the morning, we were mortified. We chalked it up to the drinks and pretended it never occurred. Well, over a decade later, I found myself at her doorstep in tears. A few weeks afterward, feeling like the most inadequate woman alive, I went to her place. I was so low, so shattered. I told her I needed to get drunk, and we did. The feeling of inadequacy started to fade, but it never truly went away. And how did you end up in bed with her and Glass Joe? Dominic came home from work and found us completely wasted. Susie confided in him about my issues. He began telling me how beautiful I was, how he desired me. Susie backed him up, mentioning our past in high school. He got excited and suggested we kiss. We were so drunk that we obliged. It all began with a playful kiss, but before I knew it, things had escalated beyond control. How many times did you sleep with them? She turned to gaze at the now darkened sky above us and whispered, Twice. It stung. The drunken episode was bad enough. I could eventually move past it, but knowing she'd been with them again was a whole other blow. So, at the party in the kitchen, what were you and Dominic discussing? Her eyes flashed with anger and a hint of guilt as she recalled it. He was drunk, complimenting my hot costume and suggesting we go to their place for some fun. I was worried someone might overhear, so I tried to hush him. I admitted my mistake, saying the three of us couldn't continue. Then he got a bit forceful, pressing against me. That's when you walked over? Yes. I gathered my lingerie in a pile. Wasn't that what you said? She nibbled her lip, shaking her head. I was furious, Greg. Seeing Dominic pestering me like that just reminded me how little you valued me. Were you planning on heading to his place later for some fun since he appreciated you? She shook her head, locking eyes with me. No. I was hoping you'd finally take the initiative. I chose the Catwoman outfit because I knew you loved Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns. You once told me how you fell for her because of that suit. I saw the way you looked at me in it. I saw desire in your eyes. Mine. I almost skipped the party altogether to get what I'd been yearning for. I wish I had. I hoped when we got home you'd take me. And then Dominic happened. She spat his name out. Well, none of this would have happened if you hadn't slept with him. Why didn't you just talk to me, Alicia? She sadly shook her head again, sniffing. I don't know, Greg. I wish I did. Lord knows why I didn't. Well, I guess there's enough blame to go around. She turned to me, hopeful. So what now? Greg, I don't want to lose you. I love you so much. I'd do anything for us to get through this. My head swirled. Can we get through this? Can I forgive her, knowing I played a part in our downfall? Leave the past behind? I don't know, Alicia. So much has happened. It'll take a lot for us to start healing from this. A glimmer of hope sparked within her. She wiped her tears, gripping my hand. Please, honey, I'll do anything. Just give me a chance to show you how much I love you." I met her gaze, sensing hope. I began to feel it too. It'd take time, but maybe we could mend each other. If we both fought hard enough, there might be a chance. "All right, Alicia, but it'll take several steps. First, we need counseling. It's necessary. Obviously, we have a lot to work through. We need to learn how to communicate with each other." She kissed my cheek, embracing my neck. "Yes, darling, whatever you say. Secondly, you need to cut ties with Susie." That's when I saw the light fade from her eyes, feeling it dim in my heart. "Well, what did you say?" "I said you need to end your friendship with Susie." "Greg, why are you asking me to do this?" I reclined in my chair, staring at her in disbelief. "Seriously, Alicia? You cheated on me with her and her husband. What do you expect me to do? Just trust that it won't happen again? Every time you're with her or talk to her, do you realize what goes through my mind? How can I heal if this wound keeps getting salt rubbed in it?" She recoiled as if I'd struck her, tears welling up in her eyes. We locked eyes in silence as seconds stretched into eternity. "You want me to choose between my best friend and my husband? I can't do it, Greg. Please, don't make me." Words couldn't convey the agony that coursed through me at that moment. Strangely, it was worse than catching her in the act. This time, there was no anger to mask it. My heart constricted painfully, crushed by the weight of the realization that it was too much to bear. The fact that she couldn't choose me over her best friend was devastating, a catastrophe of unfathomable proportions. The woman I loved most didn't love me the same way. I wasn't her one and only love. I shared her heart with another. Dominic's irrelevant now. I don't care about him. This is bigger, Alicia. But she couldn't sever her ties with Susie. The bond was too strong, rivaling her love for me. She couldn't let it go, even if it meant sacrificing our marriage. Sadly, we divorced less than a year later. Alicia fought tooth and nail to prevent it, even stooping to humiliating herself. I never imagined I'd see her pride crumble like that. She begged me at my workplace not to leave her, embarrassing herself in front of everyone. I begged too. It was a heart-wrenching plea that left everyone uncomfortable. Even I secretly hoped I'd give her another chance. But I couldn't bear the thought of her being around him as long as she refused to relinquish her friendship. In essence, I was right. No spouse should have to share. A year later, the wounds still run deep. There are no winners here. We do our best for the kids, avoiding putting each other down in their presence. Yet, many nights I've been a shoulder for Greg to cry on. But there was one silver lining this Halloween. He brought a date to my party. She wasn't dressed as Catwoman. Maybe she's just a rebound, not his next great love. But finding someone new is still progress. Real life isn't about neatly packaged endings. It's a messy, gradual healing process. Alicia, Dominic, and Susie didn't show up at the party. They cut off contact with the rest of us. Susie remained staunchly by Alicia's side, accusing Greg of unfairness and trying to force an impossible choice. In my view, the choice wasn't impossible. Alicia simply didn't want to be married as much as a loving wife should. She claimed she'd do anything, but actions speak louder than words. She might have been willing to play the part of a love-making slave or a doting housewife, but when it came to sacrificing something personally significant, our marriage wasn't worth it to her. In the end, he's better off without her.
Approaching April 1st, I eagerly awaited a prank from my husband Lester. Over the years, our history as pranksters had seen an annual increase in the severity of our jokes. The streak of mischief began with me one warm day when Les and I went out. Despite wearing a buttoned-up jacket, I claimed to feel a chill as we strolled through the mall. Suddenly, I removed my jacket to reveal a t-shirt with the words, "I am with stupid," complete with an arrow pointing sideways, standing right next to me. He couldn't initially discern what was on my t-shirt, only noticing the amused reactions of passers-by. It took him a while to realize that every time I shifted position, it was to ensure the arrow on my t-shirt was pointing at him. His face turned crimson, and thus commenced our official prank war. Then came the year when I received an official-looking email, supposedly from the local health department, claiming I had been listed as a lovemaking contact of an Anthony Sanders and instructing me to undergo immediate testing. What I hadn't anticipated was the CC line, including everyone in my office, suggesting they had received the same alarming message. Most of them knew Anthony as an old college boyfriend, oblivious to the fact that I hadn't seen him in over a year, let alone been involved lovingly. Lester, you got me good. Last year I edited a photo, replacing my husband's average-sized member with a comically tiny one and sent it around his office. Truth be told, he's actually above average in that department. He was furious, spending 2 nights away before even considering coming home. No matter how much I apologized, I ended up resorting to an offer of 3 specific favors just to coax him back. 3 bed acts he couldn't refuse. Once home and appeased, he claimed our pranks had spiraled out of control, vowing never to retaliate or prank me again. His promise seemed sincere, but I didn't buy it. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, plotting his revenge. I was certain this year would showcase the darkest corners of his devious mind. I waited, a mix of anticipation and dread. I went to extremes, eavesdropping on his calls, planting a recorder in his car, even scrutinizing our finances for anything suspicious. I was determined not to fall for his prank this time. Yet, my snooping turned up nothing incriminating. He was far cleverer than I had given him credit for. As March passed, Lester appeared unchanged at home while I scrutinized his every move. From midnight on March 31st, I was on high alert. But nothing occurred right after midnight, leaving me on edge. There were still 19 hours for him to spring his plan. I swore to be prepared for whatever he had up his sleeve. The following morning, April 1st, when I descended to the kitchen, he casually offered to whip up breakfast, a rare gesture that immediately raised a red flag. There was no chance I'd consume anything he prepared. I claimed I was in the mood for just cereal. That morning, while pouring myself a bowl and adding milk, I discreetly sniffed it, on the lookout for any added substances. Nothing. A tentative taste confirmed its normalcy. I stubbornly skipped the coffee, citing a reduction in my caffeine intake. Truthfully, I avoided it because he made it. I observed him preparing his beloved ham, egg, and cheese English muffin, almost tempted to ask for one despite the risk. Post-breakfast, we both got ready for work. Amidst checking my toothpaste for tampering and ensuring my cologne retained its usual fragrance, not skunk odor, everything appeared normal except for my sore anxiety. I inspected my car for any suspicious devices, wishing for one of those border-crossing mirrors on a stick to scrutinize beneath. It all seemed regular. Yet my heart drummed loudly when I started the engine. Testing the brakes unnecessarily, I scolded myself Lester wouldn't resort to anything physically damaging. I repeated that to reassure myself, but doubt lingered. He was seriously upset about my last prank at work. My enthusiastic best friend, Marta, eagerly greeted me and expressed her curiosity about Lester's antics the previous night. I had confided in Marta about my concerns regarding Lester's impending April Fool's trick. Recalling her support for my prank from the previous year, she jokingly requested an unaltered version of the photo, or even better, a private viewing in our bedroom. I noted her eagerness for some excitement in her life. I shared with Marta that Lester had been relatively quiet, but I was convinced he was plotting something. I could sense it in the air at night. Marta playfully commented on her love for slipping song lyrics into conversations, prompting a chuckle from me. I believe he's prolonging my suspense just to push me over the edge. Well, he doesn't have far to go right now. But mark my words, whatever he pulls, I won't fall for it. He may be the prince of pranks, but I am the queen of jokes. We laughed, and then I finally indulged in my much-delayed morning coffee. I checked my desk for unexpected surprises and went about my work relatively normally, though occasional thoughts of what might await me later lingered. The first time my desk phone rang, I practically leaped out of my chair, chuckling at my own Hayden nerves. Nothing out of the ordinary happened for the rest of the day. I half expected a delivery of risque items that would accidentally be revealed in front of my colleagues, but thankfully, nothing of the sort occurred. As the workday's end neared, my anxiety skyrocketed. At 5, I hit the road, nearly missing the red light. As my mind fixated on what awaited me at home, I gave myself a light slap to refocus on driving safely. Upon arriving home, I started preparing dinner. Lester arrived at his usual time, appearing completely drained. I suspected it was an act, anticipating more theatrics from him soon. I asked if he had a tough day, dealing with too many graduates struggling with basic math. Lester responded that my remark hit too close to home to be funny. He explained that his mood wasn't due to a challenging day, but rather an exasperating one. The quarterly report deadline had kept him occupied with mundane details and figure cross-checking. Usually done before lunch, today's struggle to reconcile two totals that were supposed to match took an extra 4 hours. He even missed lunch and considered calling to say he'd be late for dinner. Fortunately, he caught the error, wrapped up the report before clocking out, and expressed being absolutely famished. He hoped dinner was on its way within 20 minutes. I suggested he fix himself a drink while I finished up, to which he responded positively, appreciating the idea. Lester leaned in, planting a kiss on my cheek before heading to the cupboard where we stored the liquor. He grabbed the bourbon and mixed himself a drink before settling in the living room, tuning in to reruns of Swamp People. It was comical to think he'd ever venture into a place teeming with mosquitoes, alligators, and snakes. I suspected he had a soft spot for people with Cajun accents. During dinner, I attempted to strike up a conversation, but my focus was primarily on uncovering the impending prank. Eventually, I probed, asking if Lester had anything planned for the night. He responded, stating that he had nothing planned after the debacle with the quarterly report. He emphasized that he didn't even consider bringing work home and expressed his desire to unwind with me by his side. Playfully teasing, he mentioned that since his favorite girl wasn't there, I would have to do. I nudged him in response. After dinner, as I filled the dishwasher with the dishes, I suggested watching a movie and snacking on some popcorn. Lester showed interest, and after preparing the popcorn in the microwave, I brought it in a big bowl to the living room, along with our usual drinks to relax. I asked Lester what he wanted to watch, mentioning that while I typically preferred movies with closeness and roughness, I was open to his choice for the night. I suggested Roadhouse, noting its blend of romance, nudity, and violence, not to mention Patrick Swayze's physique. Lester chuckled in response. Sounds good to me. I haven't seen that in a while. I love the part when the stuffed polar bear falls on the stug. Was it a polar bear or a regular bear? I thought it was a polar bear, but we can see. We were watching the movie and eating popcorn. I had a couple of rum and cokes to Lester's, bourbons, and Owl. I was finally beginning to relax and let down my guard. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and my internal alarm went off. This is it, I told myself immediately. No one comes to our house unannounced after dark. I immediately put my mind on DEFCON 1 alert status and was ready to spoil whatever dirty trick he had devised. Lester, of course, venously denied knowing who it might be. Yeah, right. I went to the door and opened it up. I was surprised to see there was a guy, not just an average man, but a huge biker guy at the door. 2 others were on their bikes in the driveway. I shook my head in disbelief. I thought that Lester, this is going to be good. I greeted the scared, tattooed biker with a knowing smile, expressing my awareness of the situation. I apologized for disturbing him and asked if this was where the party was. Responding affirmatively, I slung my arm around his waist, leading him to the center of the living room. Noticing his firm abs and bulging biceps, my husband, seeing me with this stranger, leaped off the couch, bewildered. He questioned who the stranger was, and I played along, stating that he was here to fulfill my fantasy. My husband realized it was an April Fool's joke and expressed his initial confusion. I acknowledged the prank and continued with the act, telling the stranger, whom my husband referred to as Paul, that his prank was over and he could leave. The stranger, calling himself the Bandit, insisted on staying, and I affirmed that I wanted him to stay. I turned to the Bandit, planting an exaggerated kiss on him, much to my husband's dismay. Lester rushed over, and the Bandit grabbed him by the throat, making him stumble and choke. Chuckling, the Bandit pulled me close, caressing my backside while kissing me. I reciprocated, sensing his arousal. Lester charged again, and the Bandit knocked him down with a single punch. Addressing me, the Bandit asked if he should handle Lester, or if he should stay and watch. I chose to let Lester watch, stating that it would teach him not to mess with me. The bandit agreed and stepped outside to inform the others. Inside, one of the men scanned the room and questioned what was happening, noting that it didn't resemble a party. I explained that the lady, referring to myself, wanted to be involved with bikers before heading to the actual party. Commenting on my assets, they discussed their plans, with one expressing the intention to take my rear first. They noticed Lester on the floor and learned he was my husband, whom I wanted to watch. I suggested tying him to a chair and taping his mouth, offering the materials from the garage. Lester protested, declaring that regardless of the situation being a joke or not, it marked the end of our marriage. I responded, accusing him of setting it up and now being upset because I wasn't playing along as he intended. As Lester lunged again, the bikers subdued him and convincingly pinned him to the chair. I wondered if their coordination was rehearsed. The bikers inquired about getting the party started and asked about drinks. I directed them to the liquor cabinet and the fridge for a couple of beers. Bandit turned to me, asking how I wanted to start and how far Lester had suggested they go. I responded, asking Bandit about Lester's instructions, and he looked puzzled. He mentioned I could go all the way however I wanted. In a referenced version, he did it right. If we're going through with this, I could use some help setting the mood. Got anything stronger than liquor? Absolutely. I always carry something. He fetched something intriguing from his bike. A sip later, I found myself swapping kisses with all three of them, smirking at Lester, who seemed to struggle to break free. Approaching me, the bandit declared, "Time to dance, darling," tearing off my dress and swiftly losing my underwear. Soon he was bare, as were his companions. Panic started to grip me. I hadn't anticipated Les would allow things to escalate like this. I shouted to Lester, "Consider this a lesson if you try to outsmart me engaging with his friend." But when I sensed his imminent climax, I attempted to pull away. "Too bad your pleasure isn't our concern. Your job is to satisfy us," they retorted. The following hour felt unreal, despite my objections and resistance in the midst of this chaotic group. At the end of it all, anger boiled within me towards Lester for orchestrating this and then allowing these men to subject me to such things. Each time I glanced at Lester in the chair, rage surged. Yet I masked my distress. I wanted him to believe I relished it, but I couldn't let him think his prank succeeded. After a couple of hours, the bikers departed. My movements were labored, but I managed to reach the kitchen and grab a sharp knife. When I went to release Lester, I discovered his wrists and ankles were injured. His ankles were bleeding, the ropes having torn into his skin. That seemed to have helped him. Certainly I anticipated his explosion, maybe even a physical outburst once the ropes and duct tape were finally off. Standing there, I glittered at him, ready for his expected fury. But instead of a verbal or physical reaction, he looked at me with silent rage, shoved me aside, and ascended the stairs. I retreated to the downstairs bathroom to cleanse the remnants of the bikers from my skin, noticing numerous hickeys scattered across various parts of my body. I remained in the bathroom when the front door slammed shut. Moments later, the screech of Lester's car signaled his departure. I assumed he'd sulk in a motel, a pattern he'd shown before. I silently celebrated my victory in the annual April Fool's prank and retired to bed. Saturday morning arrived, and my phone buzzed incessantly. It was Marta, asking me to spill the details about what Lester had done. I responded, saying he wouldn't believe it and suggested meeting for lunch at Fridays. Marta agreed, urging me not to tease. At TGIF, we indulged in our meal, and I recounted the actual biker encounter that was meant to be a sham, along with Lester's furious reaction. Marta expressed disbelief that I was involved in that, especially considering Lester had set me up for it. Playfully switching to a terrible Southern accent, she pretended to swoon and I chuckled. I explained how Lester had tried to deceive me with a prank involving facing a biker, only to shout "April Fools" afterward. I shared that I had outplayed his prank by turning it into a real event. Although I hadn't planned to go that far, it worked in a strange way. I doubted Lester would ever try something like that again. Marta questioned whether I was positive Lester had set it up. expressing disbelief that he would orchestrate something so extreme. The possibility of a messy divorce was raised, and there was a suggestion to get rid of any video, with a cheeky request for a copy. While I dismissed Marta's last remark, her earlier words triggered a troubling thought. What if it wasn't a setup? The idea of a potential divorce weighed heavily on me, a dire possibility I was hesitant to consider. It felt like I might have shattered my marriage, but swiftly I pushed the thought away. Convinced it had to be a setup, that's what I stuck to, reassuring myself and trying to believe it. Then a realization struck me, prompting a question about the last time a biker showed up at my door looking for a party. I wished it were true, and Marta acknowledged the possibility that I was right. The focus shifted to Lester's whereabouts, speculating that he might be sulking in some motel, furious that I had outplayed his prank. Just then, my phone buzzed, and I told Marta to hold on, thinking it might be Lester. However, disappointment washed over me as I realized it wasn't him, but an unfamiliar number. Upon answering the call, a voice I didn't recognize asked if I was Carrie Lynch. Inwardly groaning, I assumed it was a telemarketer and preemptively declined any offers. When the caller identified themselves as the police and mentioned injuries sustained by my husband, I dismissed it as another part of Lester's failed prank. Despite the assurance from the caller, claiming to be a detective named Fredericks, that they had checked my house and spoken to Lester, I doubted the legitimacy of the situation. Refusing to play along, I told the supposed detective that I would be home in an hour, or whenever I pleased. If he wanted to talk, he could come by later. I ended the call abruptly. Marta expressed concern about the police calling me and suggested I should go see Lester. I shared my skepticism, unsure if the caller was genuinely a detective or just another one of Lester's ploys. Convinced that Lester was taking the joke too far, I expressed a desire not to dwell on it and proposed getting dessert, specifically craving chocolate. I arrived home post-lunch to find Lester absent, which wasn't unexpected. Just as I'd started to remove my jacket and hang it up, the doorbell interrupted. Letting out a heavy sigh, I made my way to the door. A female police officer and a man who seemed to be a detective stood there, flashing badges and requesting entry. The shock hit me. It was real, entirely unlike what I had anticipated. Doubts crept in. Perhaps they weren't really law enforcement. I'd asked to see their identification. They presented badges, Idaho cards, driver's licenses, and business cards. Everything checked out. Apologizing for my initial skepticism, I welcomed them in. That's when I remembered I hadn't tidied up from the previous night. The living room remained untouched since I'd gone to bed, displaying empty beer and liquor bottles, stains on the couch and rug, and of course the chair. The detective focused on the chair where Lester had been bound, noting the cut ropes, used duct tape, and blood stains. I hadn't realized there was so much blood. The detective asked if this was where my husband was tied up, and I confirmed, adding that it was a bit more complicated. When asked about the complexity, I explained that my husband had orchestrated an ill-conceived April Fool's joke to make me think a biker gang would attack me. I turned the tables on him, making him believe I wanted something that made him uncomfortable. He got angry and stormed off when I freed him. When questioned about who initially tied him up, I mentioned a biker named Bandit and a couple of others. The detective shared that they had already spoken to Bandit, who was cooperating for a more lenient sentence. According to Bandit, I had invited them for a party, requested medications, and engaged in consensual activities. He alleged that I instructed him to tie up my husband to watch the event, claiming it was our shared interest. The detective needed to know if this was true, or if they should pursue exploit charges against Bandit as well. I attempted to stop it, but my efforts were in vain. I was trying to teach my husband a lesson in response to the mess he created, and I just went along with it. I hoped the detective could understand. Tears interrupted my words, and I paused before asking about Lester's condition and whether he was still at the ER. The detective explained that Lester was more angry than anything else. His wrists and ankles were bandaged and sore as expected. Lester had been discharged after a couple of hours, but came to the police station to press charges. The doctor anticipated a physical recovery. Expressing relief that Lester wasn't seriously hurt, I acknowledged that it was his fault, and I didn't want to be made a fool of. The detective commented that I handled it effectively, but reminded me that they were not the judge of fault. Judges and juries would determine that soon. Suddenly, the detective stated that they were arresting me for assault and wrongful confinement of my husband. Additionally, they advised me to get checked for STDs, as one of the bikers I was with had a severe and persistent STD. The detective informed me of my right to an attorney. In a plea for understanding, I explained that it was meant to be a prank on me, and I retaliated. I protested against the arrest, arguing that it was Lester's fault, but the detective insisted that I should tell that to the judge. Subsequently, I found myself in jail, attempting to post bail. However, I discovered that my cards had been canceled. Despite the humiliation, I called my father and fabricated a story until he revealed that Lester had already contacted him. My father, who was close to Lester, berated me for minutes while I sobbed. Eventually, he agreed to bail me out and take me home. Upon arriving home, I sent a text to Lester, pleading for a discussion. To clarify things, his reply was cold. "Everything is clear to me. My response is coming soon. I hope for a face-to-face, or at least a call." Instead, I received divorce papers citing physical exploit and emotional torment. I cried once more. I had allowed a foolish prank to ruin my marriage, an impractical joke to say the least. The trial progressed swiftly. Bandit took the stand as the primary witness. His testimony detailed arriving at the wrong address, being invited by me and others to a party, tying up my husband at my behest, and engaging in consensual relations with me. In exchange for testifying against me, he received a minor sentence for the confinement charge. However, it was my husband's testimony that cut the deepest. He admitted to our history of pranks but insisted he had vowed never to deceive me again. He believed I trusted him. The events of that night shook him to the core, shocking him to an unfathomable degree. Under oath, Lester denied any prior contact with Bandit, any consent to a pretend or real foursome involving his wife, and declared that his love and respect for me vanished that night. Displaying the scars on his wrists and ankles, he mentioned they were a lasting reminder of why he could never trust me again. His admission that he might struggle to trust any woman caused tears, even among some female jurors. My case crumbled when it was my turn to testify. Tearfully narrating my version, I sensed the jury's disapproval, especially from the female members I had hoped to sway. Guilt weighed on me, evident to all, and unsurprisingly, the verdict was guilty. I received a 3 to 5 year sentence, a leniency that could have been harsher. Back in county jail, I awaited transfer to prison when space became available. The final divorce papers arrived during my incarceration, but I barely acknowledged the settlement. One day, Lester visited, and I was puzzled by his presence. He sarcastically remarked that the prison suits me. I acknowledged that I deserved the sarcasm and expressed regret for what I did to him, even if he didn't orchestrate it. Lester responded, stating it was too little, too late, and that he still believed I set him up. He presented a hypothetical scenario, suggesting a twisted motive on his part to orchestrate a divorce with the best terms, a slicker than 50-50 split. He detailed a cunning plan involving squirreling away cash, bribing bikers, deceiving cops, and taking a minor sentence. He mentioned the need for ties to a gang, hinting at someone at work whose brother needed his approval for a promotion. Lester expressed his shock when I took the situation to a level he hadn't anticipated, and he claimed that seeing me enjoy it crushed him. Despite feeling torn between wanting to end both of us, he opted to put me behind bars. Acknowledging his correctness, Lester stated that we were both fools in the mess, but I was the one behind bars. He questioned who the bigger fool was.